Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. On February 28, 2021, successful businessman Tyler Pratt went to a meeting that was supposed to resolve his financial troubles. Accompanied by his girlfriend Jordan, he arrived in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, where he was expected by some old acquaintances. A few hours later, law enforcement would find his lifeless body at that very spot. Jordan, miraculously surviving the incident, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The only thing she managed to say before losing consciousness was two names. Names that would shock not only her loved ones, but the entire country. Lucy Li was born in 1995 in Shenzhen, one of China's largest economic hubs. She was the eldest of three triplet sisters, born just minutes apart. Seeking a better life, her parents made the decision to leave China and settle in Canada, but they left their young daughters in the care of relatives. It would be 7 years before the family was reunited, when the girls were finally brought to Toronto. Lucy's father, a determined and business-savvy man, started a driving school for immigrants, helping newcomers obtain their licenses. But the true financial success of the family came from her mother, Winnie Li. Her financial firm, Respawn International, quickly established itself in the market. With a keen ability to navigate loopholes in tax regulations and manage capital efficiently, Winnie built a reputation as a powerhouse in the financial world. Over time, her influence grew so significantly that business magazines wrote about her, and her photos appeared alongside Canada's top politicians. The road to success came at a price, and the greatest sacrifice was the family itself. Winnie was hardly involved in raising her daughters, and when she did find the time, it was only to monitor their achievements. She demanded perfection in everything: academics, sports, intellectual and artistic development. The sisters had to be fluent in multiple languages, play musical instruments, understand finance, and win competitions and academic contests. Mistakes and weaknesses were not tolerated. From an early age, Lucy did her best to meet these expectations, but she soon realized that her accomplishments were taken for granted. Her mother did not celebrate her successes. She saw them as the bare minimum. In this relentless pursuit of perfection, Lucy began to feel like an outsider in her own family. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in a small town in Slovakia, Oliver Carafa was born. His family was not wealthy, but his parents were determined to provide him with a good education and the opportunity to build a successful future. At the age of 8, he found himself in Canada, where his family had emigrated in search of new opportunities. Unlike Lucy, Oliver's childhood was not structured down to the last minute. He grew up free-spirited and independent, but as a teenager, he started drifting off course. He was drawn to risk and forbidden pleasures, constantly seeking the thrill that came with pushing boundaries. School didn't interest him, and he saw discipline as unnecessary. Lucy and Oliver's paths first crossed when they ended up at the same school. She was the model student while he was the one who often pushed boundaries. Despite their differences, they formed a friendship. Oliver didn't feel the need to meet anyone's expectations, and that fascinated Lucy. To her, he was the first person who saw her as more than just a list of achievements. Over time, their friendship turned into a romance. It was the first relationship in Lucy's life that wasn't driven by expectations or family pressure. However, like many teenage relationships, it didn't last. They soon realized how different they were, and their visions for the future didn't align. After high school, they went their separate ways for good. Following her mother's plan, Lucy enrolled in a prestigious university's finance program. She was set for a career in the family business, a life of success and status. Oliver chose a different path. His love for risk and desire for fast money pulled him into a world that was difficult to escape. At 19, he got behind the wheel while heavily intoxicated. That night, his car crashed into a streetlight. One passenger lost their life on the spot, while another young woman suffered severe injuries. Oliver, however, walked away almost unscathed, but his life was forever changed. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison and banned him from driving for 15 years. Years later, fate would bring him and Lucy together again. But this time, their reunion wouldn't be an innocent teenage romance. Now, they would be bound by secrets, crimes, and a shared pursuit of a life that would always cost more than it seemed. Lucy enrolled in one of Canada's top universities, majoring in finance and global business. But the decision had never been hers. Her mother had already mapped out what fields her daughters would study, ensuring they would take on key roles in the family company. Lucy knew her education wasn't about self-discovery. It was just another stage in a plan she had never chosen. Throughout her university years, she was closely monitored and expected to deliver nothing short of excellence. Simply graduating wasn't enough. She had to do it with top honors. Every mistake was seen as failure, and even the slightest deviation from the plan brought her mother's disappointment. Lucy pushed herself relentlessly, earning academic awards, landing internships at top firms, and building the perfect resume. After graduation, she was immediately brought into the family business. Winnie expected her to integrate into the company's financial operations and gradually take on a leadership role. To the outside world, Lucy was the picture of success. But inside, she felt trapped. While Lucy lived in a world of strict discipline and career pressure, Oliver was serving his sentence, building new connections along the way. Among his cellmates were people involved in illegal businesses, stolen car operations, and various fraudulent schemes. They quickly recognized Oliver's appetite for risk and ambition. He listened, learned, and memorized the tactics they used to work around the law. These lessons would later help him establish his own ventures in the shadows. In 2019, after 5 years behind bars, he was released. But reintegrating into normal life was far more difficult than he had expected. With no formal education or legitimate work experience, legal income opportunities didn't offer the kind of money he wanted. On top of that, his driving ban stripped him of the freedom he had once taken for granted. During this time, he searched for a new path. He briefly attempted a career in modeling, hoping to use his looks as a source of income. His photos started appearing in small advertising campaigns. The money wasn't substantial, but it helped him build an image of success. That's when he turned his attention back to Lucy. They hadn't seen each other in years. Back in school, she had been a driven, ambitious student with a promising future ahead of her. But now she was different. Her social media was filled with photos from lavish parties, exotic vacations, and high-end restaurants. She had become a popular influencer, her follower count steadily growing, and brands were eager to collaborate with her. Oliver decided to reach out. Their conversations started with reminiscing about the past, and soon shifted to their present lives. Lucy admitted that, on paper, she had achieved everything her mother had envisioned, but deep down, she didn't feel fulfilled. Her career had been built on other people's expectations. Oliver, in turn, painted a picture of himself as someone who had faced hardships, but was now looking for a fresh start. A few days later, they met in person. Sitting across from each other at a restaurant, they talked about how much they had changed. Oliver appeared confident, speaking about new opportunities. Lucy listened, drawn to his sense of freedom. He wasn't bound by corporate structures or family-imposed rules. He lived on his own terms. Just weeks after reconnecting, Lucy made a decision that even she hadn't seen coming. She packed her things and moved in with Oliver. In an instant, she severed all ties to her past life, walking away from the future her mother had meticulously planned. She chose the unknown over the predictable. At that moment, she had no idea that this path wouldn't lead to freedom, but to disaster. Lucy's decision to leave her family came as a shock to her mother. Winnie wasn't used to defiance. Everyone in her circle followed the rules she set, and she expected the same from her daughters. When she found out that Lucy had chosen to be with Oliver Carafa, a man with a criminal record, her reaction was swift and severe. Overnight, Lucy's bank accounts were frozen, and any financial support was cut off. But Lucy didn't try to go back. On the contrary, this only strengthened her resolve to prove she could live without her mother's help. However, it didn't take long for her to realize that her independence was an illusion. Within weeks, it became clear that her influencer career wasn't generating enough income. She was used to a high standard of living, but now financial stability depended entirely on Oliver. Unlike her, he wasn't worried. He confidently assured her that he had multiple sources of income and that she had nothing to stress about. Oliver claimed he made money through investments, buying and selling cars, rare items, and other profitable deals. Lucy didn't ask questions. She wanted to believe it was really that simple. Gradually, she became more involved in Oliver's business. Since he was still banned from driving due to his past legal issues, Lucy became his full-time driver. At first, it seemed insignificant. She drove him to meetings, picked people up, and sometimes waited in the car while he handled business. Eventually, she noticed that their routes were always different, and most of their trips happened late at night. The first time Oliver asked Lucy to sign documents in her name, she hesitated. She was uneasy about the fact that the paperwork was tied to vehicles she had never seen before. He explained that it was just part of his business. He was involved in exporting and reselling cars for high-end clients. He assured her it was completely legal, just required certain workarounds. Lucy didn't argue. She signed documents, managed accounts, and assisted with transactions. While she believed she was simply helping with business operations, in reality, she had already become part of a criminal enterprise. Oliver was using her status to create the illusion of legitimacy in his deals, but she had yet to grasp just how deep she was in. Despite the instability of their financial situation, the couple lived in undeniable luxury. Their apartment was in an upscale area of Toronto. They switched cars every few months, and they never checked prices at restaurants. Designer clothing, jewelry, extravagant vacations, this was their new normal. Lucy didn't realize that she was becoming dependent, not just on Oliver's money, but on him entirely. He convinced her that they were a team, that without him, she wouldn't be able to maintain this lifestyle. She believed him, unaware that she was already teetering on the edge of disaster. In the spring of 2020, Oliver received an opportunity that could take his business to the next level. Through mutual connections, he was introduced to Tyler Pratt, a man who, at first glance, seemed like a typical successful entrepreneur. He owned several companies, including businesses in dietary supplements and investment projects. However, his real income came from a different source. Tyler was a key figure in Canada's illicit substance trade, handling large-scale imports and distribution. Tyler was looking for new investment opportunities. After his divorce, he wanted to legitimize part of his assets and gradually transition out of the underground economy. He needed a reliable partner who could present a promising business venture. Oliver fit the profile perfectly: young, ambitious, well-connected, and exuding confidence. Oliver arranged a dinner meeting with Tyler, where he pitched himself as an experienced player in logistics and international trade. He spoke convincingly about opportunities in commerce, investments in automobile imports, and real estate deals. But the main topic was his newest idea: supplying protective equipment. At that time, the world was in turmoil due to the pandemic. Governments, private clinics, and corporations were scrambling to purchase medical masks, protective suits, gloves, and other essential supplies. Oliver presented a project that, according to him, could generate millions. He planned to source protective equipment from Asia and resell it at marked-up prices in Western markets. It looked like a guaranteed win. Demand was skyrocketing, and suppliers were eager to work with cash transactions. Tyler was immediately drawn to the idea. He was a seasoned businessman, but when it came to legal markets, he lacked experience. Oliver assured him that he could manage the deals using his network. Convinced, Tyler made an initial investment of $200,000, expecting a double or even triple his money. Over the following weeks, Oliver maintained the illusion of progress. He provided his partner with fabricated reports of purchases, forged contracts with supposedly legitimate suppliers, and banking documents to confirm transactions. Tyler was certain his money was working for him. A month later, Oliver claimed that the project needed expansion and additional investment. He insisted that demand was growing, which meant there was an even bigger opportunity to profit. Caught up in the excitement, Tyler invested another $500,000. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. A few weeks after his second investment, Tyler started noticing alarming signs. He had transferred the money, but the protective equipment shipments never materialized. Oliver kept assuring him that everything was under control, but his excuses were becoming less convincing. He blamed logistical delays, customs issues, and bureaucratic red tape. Tyler wasn't naive. He understood how business worked and wasn't the type to let money disappear without answers. As his demands for documentation became more persistent, Oliver realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. Panic set in. Tyler wanted proof, and there was nothing to show him. Desperate, Oliver turned to Lucy. He explained that they needed to find a way to stall Tyler and buy some time. The only solution they could come up with was check fraud. Lucy took an old check from her mother's business records and attempted to withdraw over $1 million from the Lee family account. She was convinced that the money would get lost in her mother's financial transactions and go unnoticed. However, the bank flagged the transaction. A manager who was familiar with the Lee family noticed that Winnie's signature was missing and requested verification. As a result, the transfer was blocked. The plan had failed. Now Lucy and Oliver were trapped. Tyler no longer believed their excuses. He gave them an ultimatum. Either he got his money back or there would be serious consequences. Oliver quickly realized that the only way to solve the problem was to eliminate Tyler. He discussed it with Lucy, but her reaction was conflicted. She knew they were in a desperate situation, but committing a crime seemed like crossing a line. However, Oliver insisted that they had no other choice. Tyler wasn't someone who forgave betrayal, and their lives could be at risk. The plan came together quickly. They invited Tyler and his girlfriend Jordan to a meeting under the pretense of discussing a new business opportunity. Oliver claimed he had found a way to recover the money. Tyler was skeptical, but decided to give Oliver one last chance. He agreed to meet. On February 28, 2021, around 6 p.m., Tyler and Jordan arrived at the designated location, a warehouse in an industrial area. They pulled up in their SUV, unaware that a trap had already been set. Oliver had meticulously prepared. He had purchased a used car with cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. They had also secured a disposable phone to communicate with Tyler. To further disguise herself, Lucy wore a wig to alter her appearance. As soon as Tyler stepped out of the car, Oliver pulled out a weapon. His first shots were aimed at Jordan. He knew that eliminating a witness would change the course of any future investigation. The bullet struck her in the chest, and she collapsed, losing consciousness. Tyler froze, realizing this was the end. Oliver didn't give him a chance to react. He turned the weapon on him and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Several shots rang out, and Tyler fell to the ground, instantly unconscious. Lucy stood nearby, not interfering, but fully aware that there was no turning back. In that moment, their lives changed forever. They weren't just con artists anymore. They had crossed into something far worse. Oliver quickly moved to check Tyler's SUV, making sure Jordan wasn't breathing. Seeing no signs of life, he left her body near the vehicle and told Lucy to leave. Certain that they had erased all witnesses, Oliver and Lucy left the warehouse, convinced that no one would be able to trace the crime back to them. But within an hour, something happened that they never could have predicted. At around 7:20 p.m., a truck driver passing through the area noticed someone lying near the entrance of the warehouse. It was Jordan. Despite her injuries, she was still alive and had managed to move just enough to catch the driver's attention. The man immediately called for emergency services. When paramedics arrived, they found that Jordan was still breathing. She was unconscious, but her pulse remained stable. No one knew how long she had been lying on the cold concrete floor, but one thing was clear. She had miraculously survived. She was rushed to the hospital, where surgeons performed emergency procedures to save her life. Law enforcement quickly assessed the scene. Inside the warehouse, they found Tyler's body. He had passed instantly from multiple gunshot wounds. There were no security cameras and no immediate witnesses, but the key to solving the case was lying in a hospital bed. As Jordan fought to stay alive, detectives launched their investigation. They combed through her call logs, messages, and recent movements. Within hours, they discovered that she and Tyler had been in contact with Oliver before the attack. Their meeting hadn't been random. It had been planned by the man who was now their prime suspect. At that moment, Oliver and Lucy had no idea their plan was falling apart. They watched the news, seeing headlines about an unknown assailant, convinced that everything had gone perfectly. But when the anchor mentioned that one of the victims had survived and was now in stable condition, their confidence turned to fear. Lucy froze while Oliver started pacing the room. He knew that Jordan had seen their faces, heard their voices, and knew exactly who she had met that night. Once she regained consciousness, the police would have a full description of the attackers. Their only option now was to run. Oliver reached out to his contacts, people who could secure fake passports and arrange a safe exit. They had the money. A large sum stolen from Tyler was still sitting in their accounts. The only issue was time. Within hours, they met with individuals who had prepared their new identities. Lucy received a fake passport as a Philippine citizen, while Oliver assumed the identity of a Hungarian national. These documents allowed them to board a flight to Europe without raising suspicion. Their first stop was Prague. They chose it because it was a major transit hub, large crowds of tourists, fewer questions. They rented a short-term apartment, hoping to lay low and figure out their next move. The first few days passed relatively quietly. They avoided drawing attention, only going out when absolutely necessary. But the fear never left them. Oliver obsessively checked the news, waiting for the moment their names would be added to international wanted list. Lucy barely spoke, haunted by the realization that they were no longer just con artists. They had crossed a line they could never erase. A few days later, they moved to Bratislava, then to Budapest. They believed that constantly changing locations would throw off any pursuit. In reality, they were only creating a longer trail for authorities to follow. Their false sense of security wouldn't last. Oliver was convinced the police wouldn't track them down so quickly. But within weeks, the situation shifted. International law enforcement agencies were now involved, and the net was closing in. What they didn't know was that their arrest was only a matter of time. While Oliver and Lucy attempted to disappear in Europe, Canadian authorities never stopped working. The first major breakthrough came from analyzing phone records. Investigators traced a SIM card used to contact Tyler, purchased just a day before the crime at a store in Toronto. Further investigation led detectives to one of Lucy's friends, who had unknowingly provided the suspects with an extra SIM card. During questioning, she revealed that it was Lucy who had asked for it. This became the first solid piece of evidence against her. The next breakthrough came from security footage. Investigators reviewed recordings from the area near the warehouse and discovered that, hours before the attack, a vehicle registered under a fake identity had passed by. Inside, the silhouettes of the passengers bore a striking resemblance to Oliver and Lucy. Additionally, cameras near their apartment captured them leaving on the evening of February 28th and returning late that night. This further solidified the police's suspicions. Once Jordan regained consciousness, investigators got the confirmation they needed. She clearly remembered who had attacked them. Lucy and Oliver were identified as the perpetrators. That was enough for authorities to issue arrest warrants. Canadian law enforcement immediately shared the case details with Interpol, and within days, Oliver and Lucy were placed on an international wanted list. Their descriptions, photographs, and last known whereabouts were distributed to European law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, the couple remained on the run, but their movements didn't go unnoticed. Hungarian authorities received the alert and began monitoring foreign travelers matching their descriptions. Soon, a critical mistake by Oliver brought their escape to an abrupt end. While paying rent for their apartment, he used falsified documents that raised suspicions. The landlord reported the unusual tenants and their information was checked. When authorities confirmed they were fugitives on Interpol's list, a tactical unit was dispatched to their location. Oliver and Lucy had no time to react. They were arrested on the spot. Lucy attempted to claim it was a misunderstanding, but officers already knew exactly who they were taking into custody. Within hours, They were placed in a detention center and extradition proceedings to Canada began. Their time on the run was over. Now they would have to face justice. By the spring of 2024, the trial of Lucy Lee and Oliver Carafa had drawn nationwide attention. The case became one of the most talked about in Canada. Two young individuals who had every opportunity for success had instead chosen a criminal path, one that ended in a deadly crime. The trial lasted several weeks. Prosecutors laid out a meticulously constructed case, presenting overwhelming evidence linking Lucy and Oliver to the crime against Tyler Pratt and the attempted crime against Jordan. Investigators provided call records, surveillance footage, financial transactions, and, most crucially, the testimony of the surviving witness. Lucy's primary defense strategy was to shift the blame onto Oliver. She claimed she had no involvement in planning the crime, had no knowledge of Tyler's fate, and was simply a victim of manipulation. According to her, Oliver was in control, and she had merely followed him without fully understanding the gravity of the situation. However, the evidence told a different story. Prosecutors presented proof that Lucy had actively participated in the financial schemes, helped hide the stolen money, arranged the meeting with Tyler, and even attempted to forge financial documents. Her decision to flee and use a fake passport only strengthened the prosecution's case. Oliver, on the other hand, refused to testify. His defense team attempted to argue that the crime had not been premeditated, but was instead the result of a conflict. The court, however, rejected this argument. The final blow to Lucy's case came from security footage showing her deliberately concealing her face during her meeting with Tyler, as well as records proving that she had purchased the SIM card used to lure him into the trap. These pieces of evidence completely dismantled her version of events. The verdict was harsh, but expected. Oliver and Lucy were found guilty of the crime, fraud, and fleeing justice. Both were sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. The trial was over, but its impact lingered. Lucy, once living a life of luxury and privilege, now found herself in a prison cell. Oliver, who had thrived on adrenaline and risky ventures, had lost his freedom forever. Their downfall became a cautionary tale about how greed and the pursuit of easy money can lead to complete ruin. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Tyler Pratt as a victim, a man who trusted the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. His family and friends defended his character, emphasizing that he had been trying to leave his past behind and transition into a legitimate business. Others believed he had played a role in his own downfall. He knew who he was dealing with and willingly entered into a questionable financial arrangement. Lucy Lee became a symbol of wasted potential. Born into privilege, she had every opportunity to live comfortably without resorting to crime. But she chose a different path, one that led her away from her mother into financial fraud and ultimately to a deadly crime. After her arrest, her mother, Winnie Lee, refused to make any public statements. Her reputation in the business world took a hit, but she chose silence over damage control. Over time, she all but erased Lucy's name from her life, offering no support or defense. Oliver, however, was seen by many as a criminal whose fate had been inevitable. His troubled past and reckless choices had set him on this path long before the crime took place. For most, his conviction came as no surprise. This case destroyed multiple lives. Tyler lost his future. Jordan not only lost the man she loved, but, according to investigators, was pregnant at the time, making the tragedy even greater. What started as a scheme for easy money ended in devastation. In the end, everyone involved paid a price, through lost lives, lost freedom, or lost fortunes. Story 2. March 23, 2019, 16-year-old Angela went to a gathering, promising her parents she would be back by evening. She was headed to a celebration among familiar faces, a place that seemed safe, where nothing unexpected should have happened. But as night fell, she stopped responding. Calls went unanswered, and the people who had spent the evening with her acted strangely, as if nothing had happened, or, on the contrary, as if they were trying to hide something. Late at night, her parents received a call that was supposed to explain their daughter's disappearance, but instead, it only led to more questions. Stories didn't match, details didn't form a clear picture, and every new fact contradicted the last. Those who had been with Angela struggled with their words. Some said too little, others too much. What really happened that night? Why didn't anyone start looking for her right away? What were the people around her hiding? This disappearance became a chain of mysteries, where every new answer only created more questions. Let's take a closer look at this case. Anela Aguirre was born in 2002 into a family filled with love and care. Her parents, Anel Daniel Aguirre and Yerlisha Garay, worked hard to provide their children with everything they needed. Her father, an engineer at a government company, was a strict but fair man who always prioritized his family's well-being. Her mother, a hairstylist, ran a small salon from home, where neighbors and sometimes even Anela's friends would stop by. Their home was never quiet. Laughter, conversations, and the sounds of everyday life created a warm and welcoming atmosphere that felt unshakable. Angela's older sister, Natalie, was more than just family. She was her closest friend. They shared secrets, talked about their future, and gave each other advice. In her free time, Angela enjoyed helping her mother in the salon. She loved experimenting with makeup, creating new looks, and sometimes doing manicures for her friends, who were always impressed by her skills. Angela had many friends. She was quick to connect with people, had a natural charm, and always knew how to lighten the mood. Energetic, cheerful, and kind-hearted, she was loved for her sincerity and openness. But despite her easygoing nature, she also had a thoughtful side. She often reflected on her future, what career to choose, and how to achieve success. Her parents taught their children the value of hard work, kindness, and helping those around them. Their home was a place where everyone felt welcome and supported. No one could have imagined that this warm and happy world would one day be shattered by a devastating tragedy. Jose Alberto Chedino came from a wealthy family. His father was a businessman, and his mother had strong connections in elite social circles. Because of this, he had access to privileges that most of his peers could only dream of. He had expensive possessions, exclusive club memberships, and the freedom to travel and enjoy luxuries that were out of reach for many. Angela met him through mutual friends. They started spending time in the same social circles about 3 years earlier. At first, she didn't pay much attention to him, but over time, their casual friendship became more frequent. For Angela, he was just a friend, someone to have fun with in a group setting. But Jose Alberto saw her differently. He was persistent. He frequently asked her to hang out, sent her messages, and always found excuses to be around her. But Angela never felt the same way. To her, he was just a friend, and his advances made her uncomfortable. Her close friends knew that he had asked her out multiple times, but she always turned him down. One evening, at a gathering with mutual friends, something happened that made Angela uneasy. While hanging out by the pool, her friends playfully pushed her into the water. Soaked, she asked Jose Alberto to help her find something dry to change into. At that moment, he suggested they go somewhere private, hinting at something more. Angela immediately refused. From that point on, she became more distant toward him, avoiding personal conversations. Over time, her discomfort around Jose Alberto grew. She confided in her friends, saying that he was becoming too persistent. They reassured her, telling her to ignore him, but Angela could sense that his interest wasn't fading. Even so, she continued to interact with him, not because she wanted to, but because their social circles overlapped, making it difficult to completely avoid him. On March 23, 2019, Angela Aguirre woke up with excitement. That day, her best friend was celebrating a birthday, and she wanted to attend the party. She had discussed it with her parents in advance, but when it came time to ask for permission, she received a firm no. The reason was simple. Her friend lived in a neighborhood that wasn't considered safe, and her parents didn't want to put their daughter at risk. Angela tried to persuade them, offering to be driven there by car. But her mother and father remained firm in their decision. Disappointed, she messaged her friends, venting about her parents' strict rules. That same morning, she received a message from Jose Alberto Chedino. It was his birthday too, and he invited her to celebrate with him. He suggested starting the night at a private club and then heading to La Terraquea Island, a secluded spot that could only be reached by boat. Angela hesitated. After being unable to attend the first party, this was her chance to still spend the evening with friends, and she decided to accept the invitation. But there was a problem. If she told her parents the truth, that the party would take place on an island, they would likely say no. So she chose to leave out some details. That evening, when she spoke to her parents about her plans, she reassured them that the gathering would be in a safe place. She emphasized that an adult chaperone, a relative of the birthday host, would be present, and that it would be a small, private event. Her parents hesitated, but after having already refused her earlier that day, they didn't want to disappoint their daughter again. They knew Jose Alberto and understood that they couldn't keep Anela completely isolated from her peers. After much convincing, her father agreed, but under strict conditions. No alcohol, frequent phone check-ins, and returning home at the agreed-upon time. As evening approached, Anela got ready for the night. She stood in front of the mirror, carefully choosing her outfit. At first, she considered wearing a dress, but then decided on something more comfortable. Shorts and a light blouse, perfect for an outdoor party. She braided her hair neatly and applied light makeup. The drive to the club took about 15 minutes. Her father remained mostly quiet, but before they arrived, he reminded her once again, "If anything feels off, call me immediately." When they pulled up, a small group of people had already gathered outside the club. Anela couldn't enter without a chaperone, so she waited. A few minutes later, Jose Alberto arrived. He was relaxed, smiling, and greeted Anela without acknowledging her father. Before leaving, she quickly said goodbye, gave her father a kiss on the cheek, and walked away with her friend. It was the last time her parents would see her alive. When Anela met up with Jose Alberto outside the club, he suggested heading to La Terraquea Island almost immediately. The island, located in the middle of the Caroni River, was secluded and could only be reached by boat. He assured her that the real party was happening there, that their group was already gathered, and that they could have fun without any restrictions. He promised it was safe, that no strangers would be there, only people he trusted. He didn't give Anela much time to think. He told her the boat was already waiting, and that if she truly wanted to enjoy the night, she shouldn't say no. Her options were to either go along with the group or stay behind alone, which would have seemed strange to those around her. She chose to go. At the dock, the boat was waiting. The boat that would take them to the island belonged to Jose Alberto's godfather, Jose Zarilla. He was the oldest among them, a well-known businessman who, despite his age, maintained close ties with younger crowds and hosted events like this. On board were several others, his son Bloomberg's girlfriend Jocelyn Barrero, and two family friends, Orlando Salazar and Wilmer Diaz. All of them were significantly older than Anela. As the boat pulled away, leaving the city lights behind, the passengers laughed, talked loudly, and speculated about how the night would unfold. Bottles of alcohol were already being passed around freely, with no concern for moderation. La Terraquea Island was known as a party spot. There were no permanent structures, but it had been set up specifically for gatherings. A bar, a dance floor, and lounge areas had been arranged to accommodate large groups. It was a place where no one monitored what was happening. When the boat reached the shore, the group made their way toward the center of the island, where music was blasting, tables were set up with drinks, and the air was thick with the scent of alcohol and tobacco. The atmosphere was lively, people were dancing, others sat at tables, some were laughing, while a few already seemed intoxicated. The group quickly blended into the festivities. Drinks flowed freely, glasses were constantly refilled, and no one was keeping track of how much anyone consumed. Anela was surrounded by people. Someone was always raising a toast with her, pulling her into conversations, and encouraging her to enjoy the night. Time passed, the music grew louder, and the party showed no signs of slowing down. People moved between the bar and the dance floor, relaxed in lounge areas, and made plans for the rest of the night. At some point, Jose Alberto began staying closer to Anela. He made sure she was never alone, continuously engaging her in conversation and offering her more drinks. The night became increasingly chaotic. There was no structure, and no one was in control of what was happening. The group continued celebrating, losing track of time and their surroundings. People began dispersing throughout the island. Some kept dancing, others wandered off into the darkness. The party on La Terraquea Island lasted well into the night, becoming more disorganized as time passed. Guests moved chaotically, blending into the crowd. The music was deafening, alcohol consumption continued unchecked, and no one was paying attention to the time. In such a setting, it was difficult to track who was coming and going, who was talking to whom, or even who remained on the island. The last confirmed sighting of Anela was shortly before midnight. She had been moving between the dance floor, the bar, and the shoreline, socializing and drinking. Then, at some point, she vanished from sight. Several people later said that Anela might have just stepped away for some quiet time, away from the noise. This didn't raise any concerns at first, since guests frequently wandered off around the island, relaxed by the water, or found quieter spots. However, as time passed, it became clear that she was nowhere to be found. No one could pinpoint exactly when Anela disappeared, but at the time, no one made an effort to find out what had happened to her. Some partygoers claimed they assumed she had left early or taken a boat back with someone else, yet no one bothered to check if that was actually the case. No one searched the area, called out her name, or even sent her a message. By then, her phone was no longer responding, but no one took this as a sign of concern. At some point, the party started winding down, people were exhausted, the music had faded, and guests were gradually leaving. That's when it became evident Anela was missing. But still, no one actively looked for her. No calls were made to her parents, and no one reported that she had disappeared. Perhaps those present didn't want to draw attention or feared the consequences. Under the influence of alcohol, they chose not to dig too deep into the situation. Each person assumed someone else would handle it, but in the end, no one did anything. When the group finally decided to leave the island, no one stayed behind to search for Anela. Not a single person suggested waiting until sunrise, checking the area, or scanning the river. The boat, filled with the remaining guests, pulled away from the shore and headed back, leaving the dark, silent island behind. Anela Aguirre's parents were anxiously waiting for 8 p.m., the time they were supposed to pick her up from the party. Her father left early, driving to the parking lot of the club where Anela had said the gathering would take place. As soon as he arrived, he called her to let her know he was there. The phone rang, but there was no answer. He waited a few minutes and tried again. Same result. At first, he didn't panic. He assumed she might not have heard the call because of the music or had left her phone in her bag. He remained patient, glancing at the clock, but with every passing minute, his worry grew stronger. He kept dialing her number over and over, but she never picked up. After 30 minutes, he decided to call his wife to check if Anela had reached out to her. She answered with a worried voice, saying she hadn't heard from their daughter since she left the house earlier that evening. Realizing that Anela wasn't at the club, her parents started calling her friends, hoping someone could tell them where she was. However, none of them knew that she had never actually been at the club that night. Desperate for answers, they tried to get in touch with other party guests, but they couldn't find anyone who had useful information. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew something was very wrong. Over the next few hours, they called Anela 56 times, but her phone remained unreachable. Around 2 a.m., their phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Her father picked up immediately, hoping to hear his daughter's voice, but instead it was Jose Alberto's mother. She uttered a sentence that felt like a nightmare. She fell off the boat. In that moment, Anela's parents' world collapsed. They had no idea what boat she was talking about. Anela had said she was at a party in a club. How could she have ended up on the water? They demanded an explanation, but the woman sounded hesitant, as if she herself wasn't entirely sure what had happened. Something didn't feel right. Their instincts told them that this situation was far more serious than they were being led to believe. Why were they only hearing about this now? Why had no one called earlier? If their daughter had fallen into the water, Why hadn't anyone raised the alarm immediately? Every answer they received only deepened their fear. They knew something terrible had happened, but they had yet to realize just how devastating the truth would be. After receiving the late-night call from Jose Alberto's mother, Anela's parents knew their worst fears were coming true. They didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. The situation was critical. Their daughter was missing, and no one had made an effort to find her. They clung to the hope that if they acted quickly, there was still a chance to save her. At 4 a.m., without wasting a second, they went to the police and demanded an immediate search operation. But instead of urgency, they were met with indifference. The officers on duty explained that officially, a person is not considered missing until 72 hours have passed, and until then, no active search would take place. They were told to wait. Maybe she had just lost track of time. Maybe her phone battery had died. Maybe she was simply out having fun and hadn't realized how late it was. But her parents knew better. They knew Anela would never disappear like this, and every passing moment without action meant losing precious time that could have saved her. This version of events seemed absurd to Anela's parents. Their daughter had never disappeared without warning, never kept her phone off for this long, and never broke her agreements with them. But the police weren't listening. Her parents knew that if they sat back and waited, precious time would be lost. So they took matters into their own hands. Her father's first move was to go to Jose Alberto's family home, demanding answers. He wanted to know who had been with his daughter, where she had last been seen, and who had actually witnessed her falling from the boat. But the responses he received were vague and evasive. Meanwhile, Anela's mother was calling all of her daughter's friends, hoping that someone could tell her where she had been at the moment she vanished. But no one even knew that she had been on the island. That confirmed their worst fear. Anela had intentionally kept her real plans a secret from everyone. Realizing that phone calls alone wouldn't be enough, the parents turned to social media for help. By 6 a.m., they began posting online, sharing their daughter's photo, her description, and the last known location where she had been seen. They begged anyone with information to come forward. The posts quickly spread, people shared them, sent messages of support, and some even volunteered to help in the search. Several people, after seeing the posts, recalled that they had seen a large group on the island the night before. They remembered young men and women partying, drinking, and among them, a girl who looked like Anela. At the time, no one thought much of it. Now, those sightings carried a much darker meaning. Anela's parents knew they couldn't wait for the authorities to take action. They went straight to the dock, where the boat had departed for the island. There, they tried to question staff about who had been operating the vessel and whether any unusual activity had been reported. But once again, they were met with silence. It turned out that no one had been keeping track of the boat's trips that night. No patrols had recorded any departures after 5 p.m., even though nighttime travel on the water was officially prohibited. While the parents desperately searched for any clue, social media erupted. Anela's story gained massive attention, sparking outrage. People demanded answers, called for immediate search efforts, and flooded police pages with comments urging action. Despite the authorities' inaction, Anela's family pushed forward with their own investigation. They gathered a group of volunteers and started searching the riverbanks, knowing that every minute counted. But the truth they were about to uncover was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The search for Anela Aguirre lasted 3 days. However, on March 26th, all hope was shattered. At 7 a.m., local fishermen spotted a floating body near the riverbank, caught in the branches. It was found several miles upstream from the location where, according to the group, Anela had fallen from the boat. News of the discovery quickly reached the authorities. Soon after, an investigative team arrived at the scene, and within hours, Anela's parents received the confirmation they had been dreading. The body belonged to their daughter. The initial examination only raised more questions. Anela was still wearing a wetsuit and a life jacket, making the possibility of an accidental drowning highly unlikely. Official reports stated that if she had truly fallen overboard, the river's current would have carried her downstream. However, her body was found in the opposite direction, contradicting the laws of hydrodynamics. This meant she could not have drowned in the location described by the witnesses. The first forensic analysis revealed multiple signs of physical trauma. Bruises and lacerations were found on her head and face, indicating severe blunt force impact. Additionally, there were indications of aggressive assault. The official cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation due to drowning, but the report suggested she may have been unconscious before entering the water. Anela's parents were devastated. They had known something was wrong but could never have imagined the full extent of the horror. The authorities remained slow to comment, and the police avoided giving direct answers. However, the Aguirre family refused to stay silent. They made a public plea, demanding justice and accountability for those responsible. Meanwhile, as news of the forensic findings spread across social media, public outrage erupted. Many people began to suspect that there was an effort to cover up the case and protect those involved. But Anela's family was determined to fight for the truth. The first forensic report following Anela Aguirre's discovery left little room for doubt. She had suffered physical trauma, sustained head injuries, and lost consciousness before drowning. However, these findings quickly became inconvenient for certain individuals. Just 2 days after the autopsy results became public, authorities announced a second forensic examination. This time, the conclusions were completely different. The new report stated that there were no signs of foul play and that all injuries had supposedly occurred in the water due to impact with rocks. The official cause of death was revised to an unfortunate accident. The findings suggested that Anela had fallen into the water on her own and that her life jacket may have malfunctioned. This conclusion sparked widespread outrage. Anela's parents didn't believe a single word. They couldn't accept how the official version of events had completely changed within just a few days. How could the injuries on her body be explained? Why did the first forensic report confirm aggression, while the second one dismissed it entirely? But the biggest question, one being asked not just by the family, but by the entire country, was how could someone wearing a life jacket drown? There were no answers. Anela's parents openly accused the authorities of corruption. They claimed that someone was protecting those responsible by using their influence and power. They demanded an independent investigation and a new forensic analysis conducted by international experts. At the same time, social media erupted with renewed outrage. People were convinced that there had been an attempt to cover up the case, that powerful figures had intervened to make the evidence disappear. The protests were no longer limited to the online space. Public pressure was building. Anela's parents refused to back down. They knew they weren't just fighting for their daughter, but for the countless other families whose cases had been left unresolved in a system plagued by corruption and impunity. The overwhelming attention surrounding the case drew the interest of journalists. Independent media outlets launched their own investigations, publishing reports exposing corruption within the Venezuelan justice system. Discrepancies in witness statements, suspicious alterations in documents, and the unexplained disappearance of key evidence were all brought to light. The tipping point came when a major independent news outlet published explosive findings. The families of the suspects had allegedly attempted to bribe the legal system. Evidence suggested that $100,000 in cash and 3 kilograms of gold had been offered in exchange for closing the case. This revelation ignited public fury. People demanded resignations, arrests, and justice. The protests were no longer just digital. Citizens took to the streets. Anela's case was no longer just a tragic story. It had become a symbol of the fight against corruption and impunity. After months of relentless public pressure, Anela Aguirre's case finally reached the courts. But Venezuelan authorities made an unusual decision. The trial would be held in secrecy. Journalists, activists, and even the victim's family were denied access to the proceedings. From the start, it was clear that the pressure on Anela's family was intensifying. Her parents began receiving threatening phone calls and warnings that they should stop stirring things up. Anonymous messages were sent their way and strangers were spotted lurking near their home. Despite all obstacles, the trial took place. In the end, Jose Alberto Chidino and his godfather, Jose Zorrilla, were sentenced to 29 years in prison. The court found them guilty of aggression and criminal actions. But the most shocking part was something else. Every other guest at the party was fully acquitted. None of them faced any consequences for covering up the crime or failing to act when Anela disappeared. This verdict sparked a new wave of public outrage. People demanded real justice, arguing that it was impossible for the crime to have been committed by only two individuals. Anela's parents appealed the decision, but the court refused to reconsider their arguments. The trial ended, but justice never truly prevailed. The sentencing of Jose Alberto Chidino and Jose Zarilla did not bring closure. Instead, it raised even more questions. Anela Aguirre's parents could not accept that the other guests had walked free. They were convinced that more people were responsible, but the system chose to close the case and act as if justice had been served. Immediately after the verdict, the family filed an appeal, demanding a new investigation, and for all those present on the island that night to be held accountable. They pushed for additional interrogations and access to classified case materials, but their efforts were met with resistance. The judicial system showed no urgency in reopening the case, and key pieces of evidence that could have implicated others had either disappeared or were ignored. Too many inconsistencies remained. Why was Anela's body found in a that didn't match the supposed accident? How could she have drowned while wearing a life jacket? Why didn't her friends search for her immediately? Who actually caused her injuries? What exactly happened that night? These questions were left unanswered. Months passed, yet the case remained at a standstill. Anela's parents continued their fight for the truth, but they were met with endless refusals and closed doors, and the more the authorities tried to bury this case, the more people became convinced. Story 3. The Shafia family fled war and instability, hoping to build a new life in Canada. They were originally from Afghanistan, a country where traditions dictate fate and family honor outweighs personal freedom. On the surface, they appeared to be an ordinary immigrant family, a father who had achieved financial success, 2 wives and 7 children. But behind this image of prosperity lay a harsh reality. Control, fear, and strict discipline became an inseparable part of their lives. Until one day the family found itself at the center of one of the most shocking and tragic crimes in the country's history. Mohammed Shafia was born into a poor Afghan family. His father passed away when he was just 2 years old, leaving his mother to care for the household alone. From a young age, he understood that survival required resilience. Education was a luxury beyond his reach, so he started working early. At first, he helped his mother with household chores, then moved on to repairing appliances. Eventually, he realized there were other ways to make money, by buying and reselling goods at a profit. Mohammed's business quickly expanded. He dealt in electronics, furniture, and automobiles, constantly finding new ways to grow his wealth. Lacking formal education, he relied on his instincts and sharp business sense to seize every opportunity. As his financial situation improved, he decided it was time to start a family. Rona came from a respected and well-off background. Her family valued traditions, but also ensured their daughters received an education. She was raised in a nurturing environment, yet her future was already determined. Like most young women in her social circle, she was expected to marry whomever her parents chose for her. When her parents announced that she would be marrying Mohammed Shafia, she had no say in the matter. She accepted their decision as an obligation. The wedding was a grand affair, held at one of the finest hotels in Kabul, with hundreds of guests in attendance. To the outside world, it was a union between 2 honorable families. But no one asked Rona what she truly wanted. After the wedding, her life changed drastically. She was now expected to obey her husband, manage the household, and fulfill all of his expectations. Years passed, but no children were born into the marriage, and Rona's position in the family became uncertain. In Afghan society, a woman's worth is often tied to her ability to have children. Mohammed grew increasingly frustrated, and rumors about Rona's inability to conceive began spreading among relatives. Over time, his frustration turned into cold indifference, creating a distance between them that only grew wider. After 7 years in a marriage without children, Mohammed made the decision to take a second wife. Tuba was younger, more obedient, and most importantly, able to give him heirs. As soon as she became his wife, she gave birth to their first son, followed by another child. With each passing year, her influence in the household grew, while Rona was pushed further into the background of family life. Muhammad Shafia established strict rules in his household, where everyone was expected to follow his will. No one dared to challenge him, and any disobedience was met with humiliation or physical punishment. He controlled the finances, made decisions for all family members, and demanded absolute respect. The women in the home existed strictly within the boundaries he set. Tuba didn't just support these rules, she reinforced them. She fully embraced the role of the primary wife, completely overshadowing Rona. Her authority in the house became absolute. She managed the children, the finances, and even Rona's fate. Over the years, her treatment of the first wife became even harsher. She isolated her, limiting her interactions with the children, and denying her even the most basic personal freedoms. Hamed, the eldest son, became an enforcer of control over his sisters. From an early age, he was raised in an environment that upheld strict patriarchal traditions, where men were the leaders and women were expected to obey without question. His father instilled in him the belief that it was his duty to watch over his sisters, ensuring they followed the family's rules and reporting any perceived disobedience. The sisters, Zainab, Sahar, and Giddy, lived under constant surveillance. Any attempt to defy their father or Hamed resulted in punishment. They weren't allowed to make friends, leave the house freely, or even choose their own clothing. Muhammad didn't see them as individuals with their own aspirations. He saw them as an extension of the family, expected to uphold his idea of honor. When the family moved to Canada, many assumed this would give the children a chance at a better life. But even a change in country didn't alter the way the household operated. If anything, the control became even more rigid. Muhammad was aware that his children were now in an environment where women had rights, so he tightened his grip to maintain authority. The daughters began to realize that life outside their home was different from what they had always known. They saw their classmates interacting freely, choosing their own clothes, making decisions about their futures. But inside their own home, nothing had changed. Hamed became even stricter. He monitored his sisters to ensure they didn't adopt Western habits. He checked their phones, observed their behavior at school, and reported everything to their parents. Rona had hoped that moving to a new country would change her circumstances, but her fate remained the same. She didn't know the language, had no legal documents, and no job. Without a passport or financial independence, she remained entirely under the family's control. Canada did not bring the Shafia family freedom. It became a new territory where their old rules still applied. Zainab, the eldest daughter of Muhammad Shafia, was the first to openly defy her family. Despite the strict control imposed on her, she secretly began a relationship with a young man named Ammar. He was older, of Pakistani descent, and most importantly, not someone her father would ever approve of. Their connection started with passing notes, then evolved into email exchanges, and eventually led to secret meetings. Zainab knew how dangerous her actions were. At home, she was constantly watched by Hamed, and even at school, she couldn't feel safe. Yet, her love for Ammar made her willing to take the risk. When her father left for a business trip, she saw an opportunity and invited Ammar to the house, believing no one would find out. Hamed Shafia accidentally noticed a pair of unfamiliar shoes in the hallway. Immediately realizing there was an outsider in the house, he wasted no time reporting it to his parents. Ammar managed to escape, but Zainab faced severe consequences. She was physically punished and confined to her room for several months, forbidden from stepping outside. While she remained in isolation, Sahar tried to fight for her independence in a different way. She didn't engage in open rebellion, but gradually distanced herself from the traditional expectations imposed by her family. At school, she removed her headscarf, wore makeup, and dressed in ways that were strictly forbidden at home. She also formed a close bond with Ricardo, a young man from Honduras who was the complete opposite of the kind of husband her parents would have chosen for her. Sahar longed for freedom and seriously planned her escape. She and Ricardo discussed leaving for another country where her family wouldn't be able to find her. Her idea was to make it seem like she had gone to Honduras while, in reality, she planned to cross into the United States. But one unexpected moment shattered her plans. One evening, she was having dinner at A with Ricardo when she suddenly noticed her brother watching her from another table. He didn't say a word or approach her, but his presence alone sent a chilling message. She was now in serious danger. When she returned home, she braced herself for the worst. Her father already knew everything. There were no discussions, only punishment. After enduring physical aggression, she was forbidden from even attending school. Realizing that escaping could put her life at risk, Sahar understood that getting away from her family would be far more difficult than she had imagined. Amid all this turmoil, Jiddy, the youngest of the sisters, expressed her defiance in a different way. She didn't try to run away or pursue a secret relationship. Instead, she acted out at school. Her aggressive behavior, frequent absences, and open defiance of teachers became her way of resisting. She wanted someone to notice that something was deeply wrong in her home. She was called to the principal's office, followed by a meeting with social services. But when her parents were invited to discuss the situation, they claimed that Jiddy's behavior was the result of negative Western influence. They assured the social workers that they would handle the matter themselves. The daughter's attempts to resist the strict family rules only made their situation worse. Their father and brother became convinced that they had lost control over them, and that meant they had to be punished. The conflict between the sisters and their family had reached a breaking point. Their fate was now sealed. When Zainab, Sahar, and Jiddy tried to break free from their family's control, they knew the risks involved. But they never expected that the very system meant to protect them would prove powerless against the authority of their father and brother. Zainab was the first to seek help. After months of confinement, she realized that her only chance for survival was to leave for good. She escaped from home and found refuge in a shelter for women in crisis. For the first time, she felt safe. But her disappearance did not go unnoticed. Hamad immediately contacted the police, claiming that his sister had been kidnapped. He accused her friend Amar, hoping to have him arrested. When the police located Zainab, she told them the truth. She had left on her own to escape her family. Law enforcement did not force her to return home, but they also failed to provide her with real protection. After seeing what happened to her sister, Sahar tried to find her own way out. She was too afraid to go directly to the police, but she made a call to Child Protective Services. She spoke about the harsh restrictions, the constant threats, and the fact that she feared for her life. The caseworkers listened, but in the end, they decided that intervention wasn't necessary, since she was close to turning 18. They offered her temporary shelter, but that only meant one thing. Once her stay was over, she would have to go back home. She knew that if she returned, the punishment would be far worse than anything she had endured before. Terrified, Sahar declined their help. In that moment, she realized the system could not protect her. Rona was the only one who truly understood how much danger the sisters were in, but she was powerless to stop it. She too lived in constant fear. She knew that Mohammed and Tuba no longer saw their daughters as obedient members of the family. They saw them as a threat to the family's honor, and she understood that any attempt to intervene would be useless. After everything that had happened, it became clear within the Shafia household that the daughters no longer followed the rules imposed on them. They had crossed the line. They had openly rejected the traditional way of life. Their actions were seen not just as defiance, but as a serious threat to the family's reputation. Mohammed couldn't allow rumors about his defiant daughters to spread among acquaintances. In Afghan culture, such stories traveled fast, and the family risked losing respect. What angered him the most was that their open disobedience was happening in Canada, a country where he couldn't control his daughter's surroundings the way he could back in Afghanistan. But to the family, the biggest threat came from Zainab. She hadn't just disobeyed. She had run away. That was unacceptable. She was living on her own, making her own choices, no longer following her father's rules. To them, this was the ultimate betrayal. Tuba knew that forcing her to return wouldn't work, so she devised a way to bring Zainab back willingly. She called her daughter and convinced her that their father had changed his mind. She told her that he had given his blessing for her to marry Ammar, and now they could officially be together. On May 18, 2009, a religious wedding ceremony took place at an Islamic center. The next day, Zainab had her hair styled and decorated her hands with henna. Her uncle drove her to a restaurant, and on the way, he made one final attempt to persuade her to reconsider the marriage. But her response was firm. That freedom, however, was short-lived. None of the groom's family members attended the ceremony. Ironically, they also disapproved of the marriage. Tuba was in tears, overwhelmed with embarrassment. She collapsed, fainting from the humiliation. People poured water on her, trying to revive her. Seeing this, Zainab threw herself into her mother's arms and said, "If you're against the marriage, I'll walk away from him." Zainab requested a divorce, and Ammar agreed. "I can't bring shame to my family," he said. The cleric declared them divorced right there in the restaurant. They had been husband and wife for only 24 hours. After the annulment, Zainab's relationship with Ammar Wahid deteriorated significantly. Under intense pressure from her family, she was forced to cut off all contact with him. The restrictions on her life became even stricter. Her movements were monitored, her interactions controlled. Ammar tried to stay in touch, but her relatives made it impossible. Eventually, their relationship ended completely, adding even more stress and emotional turmoil to Zainab's life. Zainab realized that she would never be given true freedom. She lost all hope of gaining independence. After this event, tensions between Zainab and her family escalated even further, ultimately leading to tragic consequences. This was the point of no return. If their father had previously hesitated, hoping his daughters would eventually recognize their mistake and conform, he now saw that they had no intention of returning to the family's rules. Hamid insisted that waiting any longer was not an option. In his view, betrayal could not be forgiven, and women who had tarnished the family's honor had to face consequences. He believed their father had been too lenient for too long, and if they didn't act immediately, the family's reputation would be in serious jeopardy. The decision was made. Their daughters would no longer have the right to live. Now, the only thing left was to plan how to carry it out. Muhammad didn't want to draw attention. He knew that a crime like this couldn't be impulsive. It had to look like an accident. And so, the planning began, leading to an unthinkable tragedy. Preparations started weeks in advance. Muhammad, Tauba, and Hamid carefully discussed how to execute their plan. One of the key steps was acquiring a second vehicle, a Nissan Sentra. Officially, it was purchased for convenience, but in reality, it was intended to play a crucial role in what was about to happen. To avoid suspicion, they decided to organize a family trip to Niagara Falls. This would create the appearance of a family trying to reconnect after conflicts and tensions. A vacation together would give the impression that everything was fine and that they were working to mend their relationships. Zainab, Sahar, Jiddi, and Rona had no choice but to go. Even if they had doubts, resisting their father's decision was pointless. From the beginning of the trip, they felt uneasy, but none of them could have imagined that this journey would be their last. Everything went according to plan. For several days, the family visited tourist attractions, took photos, and engaged in casual conversations with strangers. It was all carefully orchestrated so that later, no one would suspect there had been any hostility between them. In the early hours of June 30th, 2009, two vehicles, a Nissan Sentra and a Lexus RX, left the Kingston East Motel and headed toward the Kingston Mills Locks. Inside the Nissan Sentra were Zainab, Sahar, Jiddi, and Rona. The exact driver at that moment remains unknown, but it was most likely Zainab, as she was the eldest and had a driver's license. They were being followed at a short distance by Mohammed Shafia, Tauba, and their son Hamid in the Lexus RX. They kept enough space between the vehicles to avoid drawing suspicion. When the Nissan Sentra parked near the locks, Mohammed Shafia stepped out of his car and approached the Nissan. Zainab either voluntarily moved from the driver's seat or was forced to exit. Tauba then took the wheel of the Nissan, staying inside with the victims. This was done to keep them from suspecting anything. Seeing their mother beside them, they felt no immediate danger. Meanwhile, Mohammed and Hamed returned to the Lexus and drove to a nearby motel, where they planned to create the illusion that the family was simply stopping for the night before continuing their trip. At the motel, they woke the manager and rented 2 rooms, but their responses about the number of guests were inconsistent. They couldn't decide whether there were 6 or 9 people in their group, which raised suspicions. After dropping off the 3 youngest family members, Mohammed and Hamed got back into and returned to the locks. As soon as Tauba saw their headlights in the darkness, she quickly got out of the Nissan and ran toward them. This was the signal. The time had come. At this moment, the women inside the car were still alive, unaware that they were trapped in a deadly situation. What happened next could only be partially reconstructed during the investigation. It remains unclear whether the victims were harmed inside the car or outside of it. However, forensic evidence revealed crucial details. 3 of them, Rona, Jiddy, and Zainab, had sustained head injuries, likely inflicted to render them unconscious before they were submerged. Sahar, however, appeared to have resisted. There were no signs of head trauma on her body, suggesting that she may have remained conscious longer than the others. One by one, the victims were either drowned in the water or placed inside the car after losing consciousness. Their bodies were then repositioned in the Nissan. The front seats were reclined to accommodate them. At this stage, Mohammed, Tauba, and Hamed began staging the scene to make it appear like a tragic accident. Their plan was to send the vehicle into the water, making it seem as if it had rolled in by mistake. One of them started the engine, shifted the car into neutral, and exited, expecting the Nissan to roll into the canal on its own. But something went wrong. The car got stuck on the edge of the concrete ledge. The front wheels had gone over, but instead of plunging into the water, the vehicle remained suspended in place. This was a major setback. If anyone had appeared at that moment, they would have been caught at the scene. One of them reached through the open driver's window and turned off the ignition. They realized that the Nissan wouldn't go into the water without additional force. The only way to complete the plan was to use the Lexus to push the Nissan into the canal. They got into the Lexus, accelerated, and rammed the Nissan from behind. The impact was strong. The SUV's left headlight shattered, leaving fragments at the scene. With that final push, the Nissan Sentra plunged into the water, taking the 4 women with it. Believing their crime was now complete, they began covering their tracks. They attempted to pick up the broken pieces of the Lexus's headlight, but couldn't gather them all. Then, they quickly left the scene and returned to the motel to create the illusion that they had spent the night there and knew nothing about the disappearance. Early on the morning of June 30th, 2009, a Kingston Canal worker noticed something unusual. Beneath the water, he could see the roof of a submerged car. The man immediately contacted the authorities. Emergency responders and divers arrived at the scene. When they pulled the vehicle from the water, they discovered the bodies of 4 women inside. None of them had attempted to escape. There were no broken windows, no signs of anyone trying to open the doors. It wasn't long before authorities identified the victims, 3 sisters and their relative. Zainab Shafia was found in the front passenger seat, her head tilted forward. Her black cardigan, soaked after hours underwater, was on backward. Her younger sister, Sahar, was in the back of sunken Nissan Sentra. Jiddy's lifeless body floated above the driver's seat, one arm resting on the headrest. The window next to her was fully open. Rona was hunched in the middle of the back seat. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. None of them were. The initial inspection of the car immediately raised questions. The vehicle was in first gear, but the engine was off. The keys were still in the ignition. The seatbelts were unused, which was strange. People instinctively grab onto something in an emergency, but here there were no signs of struggle. At the same time, 3 people walked into the Kingston police station: Mohammed Shafia, his wife Tauba, and their son Hamed. They reported that 4 women were missing. Their story was simple. The women had taken the car keys during the night and left without permission. They claimed the most likely explanation was that they had tried to run away, but something had gone wrong. At first, the story seemed believable. The family explained that Zainab and Sahar had often shown defiance and clashed with their parents. If they had indeed attempted to run away, they might have panicked, lost control of the vehicle, and accidentally driven into the water. However, the first pieces of evidence quickly cast doubt on this version. First, the location of the car. The Kingston Canal was not a road, a highway, or even a place where someone could end up by accident. It was a controlled waterway system, and reaching it without knowing the area was nearly impossible. Second, the condition of the bodies. If the women had been alive when the car entered the water, they would have undoubtedly tried to escape. But there were no signs of struggle, no scratches on the windows, no attempts to open the doors. This led investigators to question the family's account. The theory of an accidental crash was beginning to fall apart. At the same time, detectives started reviewing statements from the staff at the motel where the Shafia family had stayed. It turned out that no one had seen the women leaving the building. Surveillance cameras did not record them exiting. The suspicions deepened. Someone was clearly lying. Police continued their investigation without rushing to conclusions. But even at this early stage, it was clear. This was not just a tragic accident. It was a carefully planned crime staged to look like one. During questioning, Mohammed, Tauba, and Haim struggled with details. At first, they claimed the women had left during the night, but when asked for the exact time, none of them could provide a clear answer. Their statements about when they supposedly left kept changing. Haim insisted that he had been asleep and hadn't heard anything, while Tauba claimed there had been noise in the house that night. Later, she added that she had woken up and seen the women leaving, only to contradict herself by saying she didn't remember. Mohammed initially stated that he had been in a different motel room at the time, but security footage showed otherwise. Police conducted a thorough examination of the car found in the water. At the scene, they discovered fragments of broken headlights. However, these fragments did not belong to the submerged vehicle. This meant that another car had been present and could have played a role in the incident. Forensic experts took a closer look at the front of the family's Lexus SUV. The damage patterns on the vehicle matched the broken fragments found at the scene. Further analysis revealed that the Lexus had dents and impact marks consistent with a collision with another car. These findings confirmed a new theory. The victims had not simply been left in the vehicle. They had been deliberately pushed into the water. Investigators knew they needed stronger evidence. They decided to place a listening device in the Shafia family's vehicle, hoping the suspects would incriminate themselves. A few days later, the police got exactly what they were looking for. The recordings captured conversations in which Mohammed openly expressed satisfaction with what had happened. He stated that his daughters had brought shame to the family and that honor had been restored. Tuba supported his words, saying they had done what was necessary. Hamad, meanwhile, repeatedly insisted that their actions had been justified. These recordings became key pieces of evidence. They proved that the crime had been premeditated and that the family had deliberately taken the lives of 4 women. The evidence left no room for doubt. The police were now ready to make their move. Mohammed Shafia, his wife Tuba, and their son Hamad were arrested on July 22, 2009. That day, they had no idea that law enforcement had already gathered enough proof to charge them. The family was preparing to fly to Dubai, but they were taken into custody just before departure. Mohammed never saw it coming. Until the last moment, he believed that the deaths of his daughters and Rona had been successfully staged as an accident. But the investigation had stayed one step ahead. When they were read their charges, first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, they tried to remain composed, but their expressions told a different story. The trial began in January 2012. It lasted 3 months and drew enormous public attention. Prosecutors presented undeniable evidence that the crime had been meticulously planned. The most damning evidence was the recorded conversations in the family's vehicle. In them, Mohammed proudly stated that his daughters had gotten what they deserved, while Tuba and Hamad fully supported this sentiment. These recordings shattered any remaining doubts about their guilt. In addition to the recordings, physical evidence was presented. Investigators demonstrated that the family's Lexus had damage consistent with a collision involving the Nissan Sentra. Experts confirmed that the SUV had been used to push the victim's car into the water. Witnesses were called to testify, social workers, teachers, and friends of the sisters, who revealed that they had spoken about the harsh treatment they faced from their father and brother. Many knew they lived in fear, but no one could have imagined it would end in such a horrific way. During the trial, Mohammed showed no remorse. He insisted that the court had misinterpreted the situation and continued to claim that his daughters had brought shame to the family. Tuba, who initially portrayed herself as a grieving mother, later changed her strategy and began denying any involvement. Hamad attempted to present himself as a victim of his father's influence, but the recorded conversations completely dismantled his defense. After 15 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. Mohammed, Tuba, and Hamad were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. They appealed, hoping the ruling would be overturned, but the court upheld the conviction. Their crime was classified as an act of so-called honor-based violence, a cold and calculated crime carried out in the name of control and tradition. The family that had once sought to preserve its honor lost everything. Their names became synonymous with cruelty, and the Shafia case remains one of the most horrifying examples of such crimes in Canadian history. After the arrests of Mohammed, Tuba, and Hamad, the remaining Shafia children were left in a difficult situation. As they were still minors, they could not be left without guardianship. Canadian authorities placed them under state protection. Social services took responsibility for their well-being. Their identities and locations were kept confidential to protect them from public scrutiny and potential retaliation from extended relatives. Some family members in Afghanistan attempted to intervene, demanding that the children be returned to their biological relatives, but Canadian law shielded them from such claims. The younger Shafia children were given the opportunity to grow up away from the harmful environment they had known. They changed their names and started new lives, but their past was forever marked by a devastating tragedy. The fact that their parents and brother committed such a crime became a permanent shadow over them, something they could never fully escape. Their current whereabouts remain unknown, but one thing is certain: they were given a chance at a different life, unlike their lost sisters and Rona. Story 4. People who seem charming, kind, and approachable may, in reality, harbor dark intentions and pose significant dangers. This is why it's crucial to be cautious and never place blind trust in anyone. History is filled with cases where seemingly charismatic individuals committed shocking acts of cruelty after earning the trust of their victims. Some of the most infamous examples include well-known figures like Ted Bundy or Rodney Alcala, whose good looks and charismatic personas masked their true nature. One particularly chilling case that shook the world occurred in the fall of 2020, involving the tragic deaths of renowned soccer referee Daniele DeSantis and his fiancée Eleonora Manta. The crime was horrifying in its brutality and baffling in its apparent lack of motive. As investigators delved into the case, the revelation of the perpetrator's identity stunned everyone. Beneath an angelic exterior was someone capable of unthinkable cruelty. Even more disturbing, the criminal expressed an intention to repeat their actions, fueled by a chilling enjoyment of causing harm. This shocking story left a mark not only for its senseless nature, but also for the cold calculation and future intent behind it. It serves as a sobering reminder that outward appearances can never fully reveal the true character of a person. Daniele DeSantis was born in 1987 in the Italian city of Lecce. He was the eldest of 3 siblings in a close-knit and relatively affluent family. Growing up alongside his 2 younger sisters, Daniele formed strong, trusting relationships with them from an early age. Sports played a significant role in Daniele's life from the start, with soccer becoming his greatest passion. After finishing high school, he enrolled in a prestigious Italian university, where he pursued a degree in law, graduating in 2009. Alongside his studies, Daniele began building a successful career as a soccer referee. Starting as an assistant referee in 2017, he made his debut as the 4th official in a match between Pisa and Benevento. Over the years, his hard work and dedication earned him opportunities to officiate in Serie C and Serie B matches, overseeing more than 130 games in total. Daniele was known for his charismatic personality, athletic build, and recognizable presence on the soccer field. His career brought him financial success and the promise of a bright future. He had big plans for his life and was determined to continue growing in his profession. Daniel's talents extended beyond his professional life. His personal life was equally fulfilling, as he was in a loving relationship with Eleonora Manta, a charming young woman 3 years his junior. The couple planned to marry in the near future. Eleonora was born in Milan in 1990 and grew up in a modest household. She was the youngest of 3 siblings with 2 older twin brothers. During her early school years, her parents divorced. Her father eventually remarried and became largely absent from his children's lives, leaving her mother to shoulder the responsibility of raising them. From a young age, Eleonora pursued sports and dance with dedication. These shared interests brought her and Daniele together in 2019, and their instant connection blossomed into a romantic relationship. Friends and family described them as a beautiful, harmonious couple, seemingly perfect for each other. According to those close to them, the pair never argued and had absolute trust in one another. Eleonora had long dreamed of earning a degree in law. In 2020, she won a competitive placement to study at a university program specializing in law and international relations. Thrilled by the opportunity, she eagerly dove into her studies that September. By the summer of 2020, the couple decided to move in together, choosing Danielle's spacious apartment in a modern and prestigious residential complex. At the time, Daniele had been renting one of the rooms to a medical student who needed some time to find alternate housing. The transition went smoothly, and Eleonora gradually began moving her belongings into her boyfriend's home. In September 2020, life seemed to be falling into place for Daniele DeSantis and Eleonora Manta. Danielle's former tenant had moved out, Eleonora had brought over her belongings, and the couple was on the verge of living together permanently. They were also busy planning what was meant to be the happiest day of their lives, their wedding. Daniele was set to officiate an Italian Cup match between Monopoly and Medina on September 23rd, but tragically he would not live to see that day. On the evening of September 21st, the couple was celebrating Eleonora's move with a quiet romantic dinner in Danielle's apartment. Around 9:45 p.m., the peaceful evening was shattered when a chilling scream for help and sounds of a struggle filled the air. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion, heard the unsettling noise persist for nearly 10 minutes. In that time, nearly a dozen calls were made to local emergency services, with many reporting that it sounded like someone was being attacked. None of them realized just how horrifyingly accurate their observations were. Shortly after 10 p.m., a 12-year-old boy walking his dog across the street from the building witnessed something that would haunt him. He heard the cries, but didn't fully grasp what was happening until a young man ran out of the apartment complex. The man hesitated briefly before heading toward the boy. The child later recalled the man's cold, emotionless expression and the knife in his hand. Terrified, the boy froze, unsure of what would happen next. Thankfully, passers-by appeared nearby, causing the man to flee. Despite his attempts to hide his face, several people got a good look at him before he disappeared into the night. Moments later, police cars and ambulances arrived at the scene. However, there was nothing they could do to save Daniele or Eleonora. Daniele was found lying on his back in the stairwell, surrounded by a large pool of blood, unresponsive. The door to the apartment was wide open, and inside, Eleonora's body was discovered in the hallway, face down. Her clothes and hair were soaked in blood. Both had passed away before emergency services arrived. The cause of death was later determined to be multiple stab wounds and massive blood loss. Forensic examiners counted 38 stab wounds on Danielle's body and 37 on Eleonora's. The extreme level of violence raised chilling questions. Who could carry out such a brutal attack, and why would they target this young, loving couple? Investigators initially considered the possibility of a botched robbery. Daniele was a well-known public figure, and it was no secret that he was financially successful. It seemed plausible that someone acting on a tip had broken in expecting to find valuables, only to be confronted by the couple at home. The timing, however, appeared to be tragically unlucky for Daniele and Eleonora. This theory was quickly dismissed, as nothing of value was missing from the apartment. Cash was left in plain sight, untouched. Moreover, Eleonora was wearing an expensive set of jewelry gifted to her by Daniele during their engagement, a pair of earrings, a necklace, and a diamond ring. None of these items were taken. Investigators were immediately struck by the extreme brutality of the attack. The victims were savagely attacked with a knife, which indicated personal motives and a deep-seated hatred toward them. This led to speculation that the crime might have been fueled by passion, perhaps a scorned lover, or someone seeking revenge. Detectives considered the possibility of a love triangle, where one of the victims might have had an affair that culminated in this violent act. However, this theory was soon ruled out. Daniele and Eleonora were deeply in love, and everyone who knew them was adamant that neither of them would betray the other. Nevertheless, the possibility of someone harboring unrequited feelings for one of them couldn't be ruled out entirely. At the crime scene, several peculiar items were found that didn't seem to belong to the victims. These included zip ties, a couple of bottles of bleach, and a blood-stained stocking. These objects were scattered across the room, suggesting they were brought by the perpetrator. Later forensic analysis revealed that the stocking contained traces of Danielle's blood and the DNA of an unknown man. It appeared that the attacker had used the stocking as a mask to hide his face, but during the struggle, Daniele likely pulled it off. The stocking also bore a disturbing detail, a sad face drawn in black marker. Eyewitnesses provided enough information to create a composite sketch of the perpetrator. The clearest account came from the boy walking his dog, who had come face to face with the assailant. However, the child was understandably frightened, and given that it was late at night, there were concerns about the accuracy of his description. The boy provided a more detailed account of the man's clothing and the backpack he was carrying, though the composite sketch didn't immediately lead to a breakthrough in the investigation. As detectives interviewed witnesses, some recalled hearing Eleonora repeatedly pleading with someone to stop, even shouting a name that sounded like Andrea several times. This was the first significant lead. Investigators began meticulously looking into every man named Andrea connected to the couple's lives, hoping it might lead them to the truth. The first person under suspicion was a man named Andrea Fermati, an acquaintance of Eleonora's from her teenage years. Though they lived in different cities and rarely interacted, they followed each other on social media. Investigators speculated that Fermati might have harbored feelings for Eleonora since their youth. Learning of her engagement, he may have acted on the twisted idea of, if I can't have you, no one can, targeting both her and her fiancé. Andrea was quickly located and brought in for questioning. Shocked by the news of Eleonora's death, he was even more stunned to find himself a suspect. However, his name was soon cleared. On the night of the crime, Andrea was on a business trip in Rome, with an alibi corroborated by numerous witnesses and security camera footage. The next suspect was Andrea Martinelli, a longtime friend of Daniele. Investigators considered the possibility that he secretly had feelings for Eleonora and resented Daniele because of it. Phone records revealed that the two men had spoken just 3 hours before the crime occurred. However, Martinelli also had an ironclad alibi, verified by multiple individuals. After ruling out the close friends, detectives turned their attention to a 37-year-old man named Andrea Rodio, a more recent acquaintance of the couple. He bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch, making him a prime suspect. Rodio was detained, and witnesses were called in to identify him. Yet, every witness unanimously stated that man they saw the night of the crime was someone else. Adding to his defense, Rodio too had a solid alibi and he was released. With no other suspicious individuals named Andrea in the couple's social circle, the investigation hit a dead end. Detectives began to question whether Eleonora had shouted a different name during the attack, which meant the time spent investigating men named Andrea might have been wasted. It was now imperative to find new leads to move the case forward. During a second search of the crime scene, police uncovered a critical piece of evidence that had been overlooked earlier. Beneath a small shoe rack, they found a folded piece of paper, likely dropped by the perpetrator. The paper appeared to have been torn from a notebook, similar to those used by students. Written on it, in hasty handwriting, was a detailed series of steps, a chilling plan of action for entering the apartment and carrying out the crime. The instructions explicitly included subduing the couple using the zip ties that had been found at the scene. It appeared that the attacker had meticulously planned to restrain and harm the victims, using the materials they had brought with them. This discovery shed new light on the calculated nature of the crime and reignited the investigation with a renewed focus on identifying the cold and methodical perpetrator. For reasons unknown, the perpetrator abandoned the most brutal parts of their plan. Most likely, this was due to the fierce resistance put up by the couple. The loud screams and commotion, overheard by numerous neighbors, also likely made the attacker fear being caught in the act. The note revealed that the assailant had spent some time observing the apartment, walking near the windows and listening at the door to ensure that the couple was alone and had no guests. Other items on the list included disguising themselves with a nylon stocking, changing into clean clothes after the crime, and using bleach to erase evidence. However, the note offered no hint of a motive for such a horrifying crime. At the bottom of the page, there was a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood where the victims lived. The map marked all the outdoor surveillance cameras on buildings and utility poles, along with several escape routes that avoided these cameras. Despite this apparent planning, the attacker ignored these precautions during the escape. Witnesses pointed out the direction the suspect fled, and investigators were able to partially track the route using surveillance footage. Yet, the trail yielded little immediate progress. The composite sketch of the perpetrator had been circulating on television and in newspapers for several days, but no solid leads emerged. Then, on September 26th, a young man walked into a police station and reported that the sketch strongly resembled his classmate, a 21-year-old medical student named Antonio DeMarco. What caught the investigators' attention was that Antonio had not attended classes or contacted anyone at the university for several days following the crime. It soon came to light that Antonio had previously rented a room in Daniele DeSantis' apartment, but had moved out a few months earlier. He had not been considered a person of interest because he no longer lived there. Antonio was described as quiet and unremarkable, someone who avoided conflict and focused solely on his studies. Many people in the building didn't even remember that Daniele had once rented out a room. Those who knew Antonio spoke of him positively. He was diligent, polite, and attentive. He rarely interacted with anyone, didn't attend social gatherings or parties, and had no known romantic relationships. To most, he seemed like a typical bookworm. Law enforcement quickly obtained handwriting samples from Antonio's university records to compare with the writing on the note found at the crime scene. The forensic analysis confirmed a perfect match, leaving little doubt that the police had identified the person behind the heinous act. No one knew exactly where Antonio had moved after leaving Danielle's apartment, but detectives managed to track down his mother, who provided his current address. It turned out he was renting a room in a shared house with 2 other students, just 3 blocks away from the crime scene. The lease was under another student's name, and the rent was split between the 3 of them. On September 28, 2020, a week after the tragic events, Antonio DeMarco was arrested outside a comic book store where he had been buying a magazine. When approached by officers, he showed no surprise, made no attempt to resist, and didn't try to escape. Instead, he gave a crooked smirk and asked how long it had taken them to find him. From the outset, Antonio didn't deny his involvement. He displayed no emotions, no remorse, and answered investigators' questions in cold, detached detail, even appearing to take satisfaction in recounting the events of that night. He recalled seeing the young eyewitness walking his dog and admitted he had considered silencing him, but was in too much of a rush. He also noted that other people nearby would have complicated the situation. Antonio's chillingly calm demeanor and lack of regret were in stark contrast to his angelic appearance and the glowing remarks from his and the hospital where he was training as a medical intern. Despite being considered shy, Antonio was described as a promising and dedicated young doctor. Detectives decided to dig deeper into Antonio's past and turn to his mother for answers. She had raised him alone, and Antonio was her only child, deeply cherished and adored. She was devastated by the accusations against him. During questioning, she admitted that her son had always been different. As a child, he struggled to connect with others, avoided forming friendships, and preferred solitude. In his teenage years, Antonio became increasingly withdrawn. He would spend hours in his room drawing or working on projects and reacted aggressively if interrupted. Concerned, his mother took him to a specialist. Antonio was eventually diagnosed with multiple mental health disorders and socialization issues. Despite these challenges, he excelled academically, particularly in subjects like math and science, which helped him secure a spot at medical school. Antonio experienced panic attacks and gradually retreated into a fictional world of comic books, further distancing himself from reality. A psychiatrist prescribed medication to help manage his condition, but according to his mother, Antonio didn't adhere to the prescribed dosage. He would often skip his medication for weeks and then take a dangerously high dose all at once. Antonio's psychiatrist had recommended he keep a personal journal as an outlet for his thoughts, emotions, and feelings, given his difficulty expressing them. Antonio's mother later turned this journal over to investigators. At first, the entries seemed relatively innocuous. Antonio wrote about his longing to live a normal life, making friends, dating, and fitting in. However, he struggled to connect with others and felt unsure of how to navigate social interactions. During his time at the university, Antonio lived with his mother until he came across an advertisement for a room for rent at a reasonable price. The home where Daniele lived was conveniently close to the university, so Antonio quickly responded to the listing. He proved to be a quiet and responsible tenant, paying his rent on time and causing no trouble. Based on his journal entries, Antonio seemed to view Daniele as a potential friend during that period. However, the dynamic shifted with Eleonora's arrival. The couple spent increasing amounts of time together, with Eleonora often staying overnight. When they decided to live together permanently, Daniele politely asked Antonio to move out. Antonio took the request as a deep personal insult, but he didn't show it outwardly. Instead, he claimed he had already been planning to find a new place closer to the hospital where he was interning. Daniele allowed him ample time to move out, but the longer Antonio stayed, the more his resentment toward the couple grew. Antonio's journal began to take a darker turn. He started writing in disturbing detail about different ways he could harm the couple, even describing acts of torment. In court, he later claimed these writings were simply a way to vent his anger and prevent himself from acting on it. However, his fantasies only intensified, evolving into a carefully thought-out plan. After Antonio moved out, his journal entries became increasingly methodical. He outlined step-by-step instructions for what he intended to do to Daniele and Eleonora. To carry out his plan, Antonio had secretly made an extra copy of the apartment key before moving out, which he never returned. His writings revealed an intense hatred for the couple, with a desire to see them suffer a prolonged and painful demise, though there appeared to be no specific reason for his animosity. Antonio prepared meticulously and left little evidence behind. Investigators noted the absence of the perpetrator's fingerprints at the scene. According to Antonio's journal, he had taken extra precautions. He coated his fingers with glue and wore gloves over them for added security. On the night of the attack, Antonio dressed in plain, unremarkable clothing and used a nylon stocking as a makeshift mask. He carried a backpack containing a change of clothes, bleach for cleaning up evidence, and zip ties intended to restrain his victims for torture. The level of planning and premeditation displayed by Antonio painted a chilling picture of someone who had been consumed by his own dark thoughts, transforming his fantasies into a horrifying reality. The student meticulously planned several escape routes to avoid being caught on surveillance cameras. Upon arriving at the apartment building, he spent some time sitting outside under the windows, listening carefully to make sure no one else was inside with the couple. Once he was certain they were alone, he entered the building, climbed to the second floor, and paused outside their door for a few more minutes, listening for any sounds. Satisfied, he used the spare key he had kept after moving out and quietly opened the door. Antonio caught Daniele and Eleonora off guard as they were having dinner. Daniele, surprised by the intrusion, asked who he was, what he wanted, and how he had gotten inside. Antonio didn't respond. When Daniele stood up abruptly to confront him and force him out, Antonio stabbed him multiple times in the chest and abdomen. Eleonora began screaming and, in an attempt to protect her fiancé, charged at Antonio. He retaliated by stabbing her in the shoulder. Despite his injuries, Daniele managed to get to his feet and pull the nylon stocking mask off Antonio's face, recognizing him. It is believed that Eleonora then started shouting Antonio's name, pleading for him to stop, though witnesses later misheard her cries. The struggle escalated. Antonio, determined to silence Eleonora, threw her to the floor and continued to attack her. Meanwhile, Daniele, bleeding heavily, managed to stagger to the front door, open it, and step into the hallway, trying to call for help. Antonio followed him and delivered a series of fatal blows, leaving Daniele with no chance of survival. Afterward, Antonio returned to Eleonora, who had crawled into the hallway. He stabbed her repeatedly in the back, neck, and head until she stopped moving. Antonio then took out the bleach he had brought in his backpack, but realizing he didn't have enough time to clean the scene, abandoned the effort. He knew the neighbors had likely heard the commotion and already called the police. In a rush, he changed into clean clothes, left the zip ties behind, and fled the scene. The paper containing his plan must have fallen out of his backpack in the hallway during the chaos. DNA samples collected from Antonio matched those found on the nylon stocking he had used as a mask, providing crucial evidence against him. However, Antonio didn't even attempt to deny his guilt. He openly described his actions in detail and expressed regret, only that the noise and panic had prevented him from carrying out the torture he had planned. Antonio's defense attorney immediately argued that he was mentally unfit to stand trial and requested a psychiatric evaluation. However, the evaluation concluded that Antonio was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. The investigation also revealed that the crime had been premeditated and Antonio showed no remorse for what he had done. When Antonio was asked why he had developed such hatred toward Daniele and Eleonora that he wanted them dead, he responded calmly, "They were too happy and it made me furious." He also admitted that he had intended to torment his victims, but things hadn't gone according to his plan. During the trial, the prosecution brought up the peculiar drawing of a sad face found on the nylon stocking Antonio had used as a mask. They questioned him about its origin and significance. Antonio explained that he had intended to leave the same symbol on the apartment wall, drawing it in the victim's blood as a kind of signature. He even admitted that he had considered using this symbol in future crimes, openly stating that he would have committed another crime because he had enjoyed taking lives. On June 7, 2021, Antonio DeMarco was found guilty of premeditated double homicide committed with exceptional cruelty. The court also deemed him a significant threat, stating that he was capable of committing such crimes again. He showed no remorse, and psychiatric evaluations suggested he had the potential to become a serial killer. Antonio was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Story 5. On a cold February morning in 2021, staff at Sharon Public School in Kenton, Massachusetts, noticed something unusual. Their colleague, 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore, had been out of touch for several days. Given the recent snowstorm, a delay might have seemed normal at first, but by the fourth day, it was clear something was wrong. Concerned colleagues contacted emergency services, unaware that they were about to set in motion one of the most puzzling and shocking investigations, where an innocent life became entangled in secrets, manipulation, and hidden truths. Sandra Birchmore was born on May 13, 1997, in the small town of Stone, Massachusetts. Her early years were far from easy. Her mother, Denise, battled serious health issues throughout her life, which not only affected her physical well-being, but also placed a significant strain on the family's finances. Sandra's father was completely absent. He played no role in her support. The responsibility of raising Sandra fell on Denise, her longtime partner, and her maternal grandmother, Grace. Despite their struggles, the family did their best to create some sense of stability for Sandra. Her grandmother, Grace, played a crucial role in her upbringing, often stepping in as a caregiver when Denise had to undergo treatments or faced health setbacks. Growing up in a household where the adults were constantly navigating life's hardships, Sandra learned independence and responsibility at a young age. From early childhood, Sandra had a deep admiration for public service and was particularly drawn to people in uniform, whether police officers or members of the military. This admiration was reinforced by the fact that many of her maternal relatives served in law enforcement or the armed forces. This environment instilled in Sandra a strong respect for the law and a desire to be part of something greater than herself. Her interest in police work first emerged at the age of 8 when she was enrolled in a program called Respect. This initiative aimed to teach young participants civic responsibility, communication skills, and respect for those around them. It was there that she first began interacting with police officers, further solidifying her aspirations. By the time she turned 12, Sandra joined the Police Explorers program, established in the 1970s. This initiative provided hands-on experience for young people interested in careers in law enforcement. Under the guidance of experienced officers, participants learned the fundamentals of police work, safety protocols, and emergency response strategies. Sandra remained involved in the program from 2010 to 2016, showing an impressive level of dedication. Those close to her recalled how seriously she took her training and how much time she devoted to perfecting her skills. This was more than just a passing interest. Sandra saw the program as a stepping stone toward her ultimate goal. However, her journey was far from easy. In 2016, at the age of 19, Sandra experienced a devastating loss. Her mother, Denise, passed away. This was a tremendous blow for her. After Denise's passing, Sandra's aunt, her mother's sister, stepped in to provide support and guidance. This heartbreaking event coincided with the conclusion of her time in the Police Explorers program, leaving a profound impact on her life. Her dreams of a career in law enforcement gradually took a back seat as she faced new personal challenges. After finishing high school, Sandra searched for her path. She enrolled in college prep courses, planning to pursue a nursing degree. Despite shifting her focus, her childhood admiration for police culture remained strong, and she stayed in touch with many individuals from the Police Explorers program over the years. Life's challenges and early losses didn't break Sandra, but they made her vulnerable to manipulation. The influences around her and the constant struggle to overcome hardships shaped her character and ambitions. Yet they also left her seeking validation and support from those she viewed as authority figures. This longing for guidance would ultimately play a crucial role in her tragic fate. In 2020, after finishing high school, Sandra Birchmore moved to Kenton, a town in Norfolk County, Massachusetts. With a population of around 25,000, Kenton was known for its safe and family-friendly environment, making it an attractive place to settle. For Sandra, this move marked a fresh start. She secured a job as a teacher's assistant at Sharon Public School. Her role involved working with students who had special needs, providing support while also earning a steady income. Though this position wasn't her ultimate goal, she saw it as a stepping stone toward a better future. Her ambitions were closely tied to her experience caring for her mother, which had instilled in her a deep desire to help others. To pursue this passion, she enrolled in preparatory courses for college, balancing her studies with her job in hopes of advancing her career. Her colleagues described Sandra as outgoing and friendly, but at times, her behavior seemed somewhat immature. She tended to share personal details, even with people she barely knew, which made some coworkers uncomfortable. Still, she had a genuine love for her students and put effort into her responsibilities, despite having limited experience. Her combination of warmth and emotional openness drew people toward her, but it also sometimes led to misunderstandings. Sandra viewed her time at Sharon Public School as a temporary phase on her way to fulfilling her dreams. She was full of plans, preparing for significant changes in her life. However, her trusting nature and eagerness to connect with those around her made her vulnerable, something that would later play a devastating role in her story. Sandra Birchmore first met Matthew Farwell in 2010, when she was 13 years old. At the time, she was part of the Police Explorers program, where Matthew, then 27, served as one of the instructors. He quickly became an influential figure in her life. Their communication began within the structure of the program, but gradually extended beyond it. By the time Sandra turned 15, she started receiving personal messages from Matthew. These conversations marked the beginning of a relationship shaped by manipulation and psychological pressure. As someone older and more experienced, Matthew skillfully leveraged his position to establish control over her. Over time, their relationship evolved, but became increasingly unhealthy. Matthew grew excessively possessive, showing an unusual interest in her personal life and restricting her independence. He insisted on knowing her whereabouts at all times and pressured her to provide constant updates about who she was with. Eventually, he began using technology to monitor her movements, further deepening her dependence on him. As his jealousy and need for control escalated, they were accompanied by bursts of aggressive behavior. His tone often turned threatening, and any attempt Sandra made to her independence was met with resistance. Matthew exerted pressure on her, expecting absolute compliance with his demands, and he viewed any disagreement as an act of betrayal. Despite the growing tension, Sandra continued to see Matthew as someone she could trust. She genuinely believed their relationship could improve and often found ways to justify his behavior. However, his influence over her only intensified, gradually undermining her confidence and limiting her freedom. What had started as a friendship eventually became a toxic and inescapable dynamic. The beginning of 2021 marked an important period for Sandra Birchmore. She was preparing for motherhood. Despite the difficulties she faced, she approached the future with enthusiasm. Her apartment began filling up with baby essentials she had ordered online, including newborn clothing, infant care items, and decorations for a baby shower she was planning. She was eager to celebrate this new chapter of her life with her loved ones, carefully organizing every detail of the event, from decorations to the guest list, despite her financial constraints. Her excitement and energy surprised her relatives, who noted how inspired she seemed by the idea of becoming a mother. Sandra had also scheduled a photography session, intending to capture special moments after her baby's arrival. This decision further highlighted her commitment to her pregnancy and her anticipation of what was to come. However, those close to her began noticing signs of inner turmoil. Much of this stress stemmed from her strained relationship with Matthew Farwell, who remained a significant presence in her life, but was increasingly a source of anxiety. In the days leading up to the tragic events, Matthew's behavior became unusual. He visited Sandra's apartment, claiming he wanted to help her prepare for the baby's arrival. He asked for access to her home, requesting both a key and the door code, explaining that he wanted to be available in case of an emergency. While inside, he seemed particularly interested in her bedroom closet, paying close attention to the space. After he left, Sandra confided in a friend, mentioning that Matthew had been acting strangely. Despite her concerns, she tried to rationalize his behavior, convincing herself that his intentions were rooted in concern. This would be the last time she openly expressed doubt about his actions. On February 4, 2021, colleagues at Sharon Public School contacted the police after Sandra had been out of touch for several days and failed to show up for work. A heavy snowstorm had recently disrupted movement throughout the city, keeping many employees at home, but Sandra's absence raised concerns. Attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Soon officers were dispatched to her apartment for a welfare check. When officers arrived, they knocked repeatedly and rang the doorbell, but there was no response. A distinct odor coming from inside the apartment quickly raised red flags, as officers recognized it as a sign of decomposition. Given the circumstances, they made the decision to force entry. Inside the apartment, officers found Sandra in the bedroom. She had been discovered hanging from a closet door using a belt. The condition of her body suggested she had been deceased for several days. At first glance, the scene did not appear suspicious. The initial police report stated that there were no signs of a struggle. Furniture remained undisturbed, and the general disorder in the apartment was consistent with Sandra's usual living habits. However, when her relatives were allowed into the apartment after the body was removed, they noticed several discrepancies that cast doubt on the initial findings. One of the first things they observed was a load of wet laundry inside the washing machine, indicating that Sandra had been going about her normal routine shortly before her passing. On the table, there were unopened packages containing baby essentials, delivered just days before the incident. Another troubling detail was a broken necklace found near where she had been discovered. Strands of Sandra's hair were tangled in the chain, which suggested possible physical interference. Her relatives informed the police that Sandra never removed this necklace. She wore it at all times, even while sleeping or showering. This detail raised doubts about the conclusion that she had taken her own life. An even more alarming discovery was her phone. Sandra used her phone daily and was rarely seen without it. However, records showed that it had been powered off a full day before her passing and was never turned back on. Concerned by these inconsistencies, her family insisted on a more thorough investigation, believing there was evidence of outside involvement. With these new findings and growing concerns about her relationship with Matthew Farwell, law enforcement was forced to reconsider their initial assessment. His behavior in the days leading up to her passing, his request for access to her apartment, and his unusual demeanor during his final visit raised serious questions. These revelations marked the beginning of a deeper investigation to uncover what truly happened inside Sandra's apartment in those fateful days. The last recorded activities of Sandra Birchmore took place on the evening of February 1, 2021. Surveillance cameras captured her returning home from work around 5 p.m. A short while later, she stepped outside to retrieve a package containing baby clothes she had ordered. Afterward, Sandra was seen once again on video, clearing snow off her car parked outside her residence. At 5:46 p.m., she went back inside her apartment, marking the last time she was seen alive. Later that evening, another key figure in this case appeared on the security footage. Around 9 p.m., Matthew Farwell entered the building. He was seen walking into the lobby, heading up to Sandra's floor, and spending approximately 30 minutes inside her apartment. Footage showed him dressed in heavy winter clothing with a mask covering his face. While the cold weather could explain his attire, the way he deliberately concealed his identity seemed unusual. After a brief visit, Matthew left the building. The next day, Sandra did not show up for work and stopped responding to messages. Federal investigators took over the case, conducting a full review of the initial findings. One of the first concerns was the superficial crime scene assessment and the overlooked details. Agents soon discovered that Sandra had been actively preparing for motherhood, ordering baby supplies, planning a baby shower, and even booking professional photo shoots. These details contradicted the idea that she had intentionally harmed herself. Further suspicion arose from the nature of the marks found on her body, which did not align with a typical case of self-inflicted harm. While analyzing Matthew's phone records, investigators recovered deleted messages that revealed a long history of manipulation. It was also confirmed that Sandra was pregnant with Matthew's child, a key factor in the unfolding tragedy. At the time of her passing, Sandra was in her 3rd month of pregnancy, and this revelation significantly impacted her relationship with Matthew. He not only denied being the father, but also exhibited aggressive behavior, pressuring her both psychologically and physically. After Sandra informed him about the pregnancy, his attitude shifted. First, he attempted to distance himself, but later, realizing the possible consequences, he reinitiated contact. His sudden interest in reconnecting with Sandra raised further suspicion following her death. Investigators also uncovered that Matthew was married and had 3 children. Sandra was aware of his family situation, and in the fall of 2020, she learned that his wife was expecting their 3rd child. This discovery deeply affected her, and she confided in a close friend about the emotional distress it caused. In one of her messages, Sandra mentioned that she intended to tell Matthew's wife about their relationship. However, she ultimately never went through with it. When Sandra discovered her own pregnancy, she informed Matthew, but his reaction was hostile. He not only questioned whether he was the father, but also made it clear that he had no intention of acknowledging the baby. This led to growing conflicts between them. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and Sandra confided in those close to her about the pressure and threats she was experiencing. This dynamic played a crucial role in her fate and became a major focus of the investigation into her passing. Further examination of their messages revealed that Matthew had repeatedly monitored Sandra, expressed jealousy, and made threatening remarks. Even more concerning was the discovery that he may have used his professional position to exert influence over her. the investigation uncovered a much deeper issue. Sandra was not the only victim. A review of the Police Explorers Program archives, where Matthew Farwell had served as a mentor, revealed numerous cases of inappropriate relationships between instructors and participants. Sandra had joined the program at age 13, and her personal involvement with Matthew began when she was just 15. This was not only an ethical violation, but also a serious offense given the significant age difference. A broader investigation into the Police Explorers Program exposed systemic failures that enabled misconduct. Since its inception in the 1970s, there had been little oversight regarding the actions of mentors, creating an environment where some instructors exploited their authority. In addition to Matthew, other officers involved in the program were also suspected of inappropriate behavior. Among them were Matthew's brother William and their superior Robert Devine. The investigation ultimately uncovered over 200 cases of misconduct, many of which had remained hidden for decades. FBI agents also discovered that a police officer had received an anonymous tip about potential misconduct in January 2021, but failed to file an official report. Instead, he privately warned Matthew, prompting a sudden shift in his behavior. From that point on, Matthew began deleting messages and attempting to rebuild Sandra's trust, moves that investigators believed were meant to prevent exposure. What exactly transpired inside Sandra's apartment remains unknown, but forensic evidence allowed investigators to reconstruct a likely sequence of events. The conversation may have escalated into a confrontation when Sandra once again brought up her pregnancy. She could have been pressing Matthew for acknowledgement or support, which posed a significant risk to him if exposed. The broken necklace found near her body suggested that a struggle had taken place. Investigators theorized that at some point, Matthew used force to overpower Sandra. Her phone was turned off shortly after he entered the apartment, leading to the possibility that he had deliberately disabled it to prevent her from reaching out for help. Sandra's case not only led to Matthew Farwell's arrest in 2024, but also shed light on widespread issues within regional law enforcement. The Police Explorers Program was permanently shut down, but the consequences of its failures continued to impact many lives. This case served as a wake-up call, prompting authorities to reevaluate policies regarding adult mentors interacting with young participants in similar programs. The charges against Matthew Farwell marked the culmination of a long and complex investigation following Sandra Birchmore's death. In August 2024, he was officially arrested and charged in connection with the crime. Prosecutors presented compelling evidence linking him to the events of that night. Key evidence included recovered text messages from his phone, revealing years of manipulation and coercion towards Sandra, as well as surveillance footage confirming his presence at her apartment on the night of the tragedy. Additionally, forensic experts testified that the injuries on Sandra's body did not align with a self-inflicted act, but instead pointed to external force. The charges against Matthew Farwell extended beyond the primary crime. They also included multiple counts of inappropriate conduct involving Sandra during the years when she was underage. Case records indicated that Matthew had used his position as an instructor in the Police Explorers Program to exert control over Sandra from a young age. These details, along with other critical evidence, directly undermined his claims of innocence, which he continued to assert even after his arrest. Despite the overwhelming evidence and widespread public outrage, bringing additional suspects to justice proved to be a major challenge. Alongside Matthew, the investigation also implicated his brother William, their superior Robert Devine, and other officers whose actions had come to light during the inquiry. However, while misconduct was established in several cases, formal charges were not filed against most of those involved. This was largely due to a lack of direct evidence or an apparent reluctance within law enforcement agencies to subject their internal system to deeper scrutiny. As of early 2025, the trial against Matthew Farwell was still ongoing. Prosecutors argued that after Sandra was fatally restrained, the perpetrator staged the scene to make it appear as though she had taken her own life, positioning her body on the closet door. However, forensic experts noted inconsistencies, key physical indicators that would typically be present in such a case, such as specific hemorrhages in the eyes and facial swelling, were missing. This supported the theory that she had been overpowered before the scene was staged. If convicted, Matthew Farwell faced the harshest possible penalty, including the potential for capital punishment. Sandra Birchmore's case was not just a personal tragedy. It became a stark reminder of the urgent need for systemic reforms within law enforcement and increased oversight of programs designed to work with vulnerable individuals. Her memory lived on through the ongoing efforts of her family and activists who continued to push for justice and meaningful change. Story 6. 27th of April, 2024. A 55-year-old man living near Myrtle Beach decided to spend his day fishing along the Lambert River within the state park of the same name. This location was a favorite of his, appreciated for its secluded and tranquil atmosphere. Unlike more frequented recreational areas, Lambert Park provided a quiet retreat to reconnect with nature and escape the hustle of urban life. On that day, the man set himself up along a densely vegetated stretch of the riverbank. He prepared his fishing gear and began to enjoy the solitude. However, his peaceful outing was soon interrupted by a sound that seemed out of place. It was the muffled crying of a woman. The sound was subdued, neither loud nor panicked, but rather restrained and intermittent. It came from across the river, but the thick vegetation made it impossible to identify the source. Though concerned, the man chose not to intervene immediately, assuming someone might simply be dealing with a private moment of grief. He respected their space and decided to continue with his fishing. A few minutes passed and the crying ceased. The man relaxed, dismissing it as a fleeting event, but his calm was short-lived when he heard a sharp and unmistakable sound, a gunshot. This sound jolted him into action, making it clear that something serious might have happened. Feeling compelled to investigate, he decided to move toward the area where the sounds had originated. He navigated approximately 200 yards through dense vegetation before arriving at a small, cleared section of the riverbank. There, he encountered an unusual sight, a backpack lying on the ground, accompanied by a pair of sunglasses and a cell phone. The immediate area appeared deserted, with no signs of anyone nearby. The man inspected the belongings but found no evidence of a struggle or anything else alarming, such as blood. This only heightened his sense of unease. Curiosity and concern drove him to open the backpack, hoping to find clues about its owner. Inside, he discovered a wallet containing identification, cash, credit cards, some personal items, and a small Bible. Despite the contents, there was nothing that explained the strange sequence of events. Realizing the situation could be far more serious than he initially thought, the man promptly contacted emergency services. Law enforcement officers arrived approximately an hour later. After conducting a preliminary survey of the scene, they began a broader search of the surrounding area. Later that same day, a second report came in from another park visitor, who stumbled upon something even more unsettling. Myrtle Beach, located along the Atlantic coast in South Carolina, is renowned as a popular tourist destination. While the city's population sits at approximately 35,000, it swells significantly during the summer months with the influx of visitors. Myrtle Beach is famous for its expansive sandy beaches, upscale resorts, and a variety of entertainment options, including fine dining, golf courses, and attractions such as one of the largest aquariums in the region and a towering Ferris wheel. The area draws both affluent travelers and families seeking affordable vacations. Beyond its appeal to tourists, Myrtle Beach is home to numerous churches that play a central role in the local community. One of the most notable is Solid Rock Church, located in the heart of the city. Established as a spiritual hub for those seeking guidance and support during challenging times, Solid Rock quickly gained popularity. The church offers not only traditional services, but also educational and recreational programs tailored to the community, including youth activities. At the core of Solid Rock's mission is Pastor John Paul Miller. Appointed in 2009 at the age of 35, he brought with him a wealth of experience in spiritual leadership. Known for his charismatic approach and deep involvement with his congregation, John Paul quickly became a beloved figure. He was married to Allison, and together they raised 3 children, along with 1 child from a previous marriage. The Miller family lived in a house near the church, allowing them to maintain close ties with the community. That same year, the Francis family joined Solid Rock Church. Angelita and Michael Francis, along with their daughters, Mika and Sierra, had recently relocated to Myrtle Beach and chose the church as their spiritual home. For 14-year-old Mika, the church became a significant part of her life. She quickly formed friendships and immersed herself in the youth programs, many of which were personally led by Pastor John Paul. This involvement helped Mika integrate into the local community. Mika's older sister, Sierra, also participated in church activities, though her role was less prominent. Mika, on the other hand, stood out for her enthusiasm and faith, which did not go unnoticed. Her active engagement in church life provided opportunities to connect with other young members of the congregation. One such individual was Jeremy, a participant in the same youth programs as Mika. Over time, their relationship grew closer, and after several years, the young couple decided to marry. Their union appeared to be a perfect match. Their shared dedication to church activities and the strong support of their families seemed to lay a solid foundation for a happy life together. The wedding was held at Solid Rock Church, officiated by Pastor John Paul himself, underscoring its importance to the community. The ceremony was a joyful event, drawing a large number of congregants. Both families expressed their pride in the couple, viewing their marriage as a reflection of family values and spiritual unity. At that time, Mika and Jeremy were filled with optimism about their future, one they envisioned as centered around shared faith and mutual goals. After their wedding, Mika and Jeremy became even more deeply involved with the operations of Solid Rock Church. Mika took on administrative responsibilities, handling paperwork and coordinating events, while Jeremy focused on youth sports programs. He managed the church's flag football team and contributed to the development of other activities for teenagers. These roles allowed them to spend significant time together, which seemed like a seamless extension of their marriage. However, a few months after the wedding, the first signs of strain began to emerge in their relationship. The demands of their shared responsibilities at the church started to take a toll on Mika. Unlike the period before their marriage, when they had more time to focus on each other, their lives had become centered around work. Jeremy, deeply committed to his role, began to dedicate less time to providing emotional support for Mika, leaving her feeling increasingly isolated. Adding to the tension was Mika's growing involvement with other members of the church community, including the pastor's wife, Allison. As Mika took on more responsibilities in the administrative office, she became an indispensable part of the team. This blending of her professional and personal life created additional stress in her marriage. While their relationship appeared outwardly harmonious, the underlying issues continued to build. The couple chose not to share their struggles with others, maintaining an image of a happy union. Yet, those close to them began to notice subtle cracks in their relationship. These early signs of discord would later lay the groundwork for more significant challenges that would alter the course of their lives. After several months of working in the administrative office, Mika was promoted to a new role as the personal secretary to Pastor John Paul Miller. This decision was attributed to her organizational skills and her eagerness to take on more responsibilities within the church. The position required her to work closely with John Paul, including frequent one-on-one meetings and consistent communication to fulfill her duties. As Mika transitioned into this role, she began spending a significant amount of time with the pastor. John Paul valued her dedication and enthusiasm for church activities. Over time, their professional relationship evolved into more personal interactions. What started as discussions about faith and life eventually turned into more intimate conversations, forming a close emotional connection between them. This shift began to create tension in Mika's marriage. In 2016, everything changed abruptly. John Paul's wife, Allison, unexpectedly returned home early one day and discovered him in a compromising situation with Mika. This incident sparked a major conflict within the Miller household. Allison demanded an explanation, leading to a heated argument between the couple. Upon learning what had happened, Allison also chose to inform Mika's husband, Jeremy. The fallout from this event had repercussions that extended beyond the two families, impacting the church community as well. While those involved agreed to keep the details private, rumors of the affair began circulating among the congregation. Church staff and others close to the families noticed changes in the behavior of both John Paul and Mika, as well as the increasing strain between them and their spouses. Despite attempts to maintain a facade of normalcy, the conflict became impossible to hide. Both Allison and Jeremy filed for divorce around the same time. The process was deeply challenging and emotional for everyone involved. Allison left the church and relocated from Myrtle Beach with her children, seeking to rebuild her life away from the events that had shattered her marriage. Jeremy, for his part, ceased his involvement with Solid Rock entirely, choosing to distance himself from the church. A few months after the divorces were finalized, John Paul and Mika publicly announced their relationship. They openly declared themselves a couple, igniting another wave of discussion within the congregation. For many church members, this was a devastating revelation. The pastor, who had previously preached about the importance of family loyalty, was now at the center of a scandal that undermined his reputation and eroded the trust of some parishioners. In 2017, a year after beginning their relationship, John Paul Miller and Mika officially became husband and wife. Their wedding took place at Solid Rock Church, where John Paul continued to serve as pastor despite the lingering controversies surrounding his prior actions. The ceremony was attended by close friends, family, and members of the congregation. For many, it was seen as an attempt to restore trust in the pastor and mend the community's fractured perception of him following the revelation of his affair with Mika. For Mika, who was 23 years old at the time, the marriage marked a new chapter in her life, along with increased responsibilities within the church. Becoming the pastor's wife placed her in a leadership role, where she was expected to mentor and organize within the congregation. Many church members viewed this union as an opportunity for both the church and its pastor to move forward, leaving the mistakes of the past behind. Immediately after the wedding, Mika embraced her new duties at Solid Rock. Beyond her administrative work, she became an active participant in church programs, focusing on organizing missionary trips and charitable events. One of her key projects involved missions to Kenya. Using funds raised through donations, Mika oversaw the construction of schools, providing essential educational opportunities such as English and math instruction. These trips to Africa became a significant part of her new life. Mika personally managed local educational programs and coordinated the delivery of humanitarian aid. Her initiatives garnered strong support from the congregation, many of whom enthusiastically participated in these efforts. Mika's dedication and energy made her a symbol of activism within the community, inspiring others to engage in charitable work. In addition to her mission work, Mika began leading classes and seminars at the church. Her presentations focused on topics like family values, personal faith, and overcoming challenges. One subject particularly close to her heart was addressing domestic struggles. She spoke publicly about this issue, drawing attention not only from church members, but also from a wider audience on social media. Mika frequently shared content on her platforms, emphasizing the importance of respectful relationships and the need for support systems for those experiencing hardship. Mika's efforts gradually began to rebuild John Paul's reputation. While many in the congregation still harbored criticism toward him for his past behavior, Mika's proactive involvement in church and community activities helped shape the image of a stronger, more forward-thinking ministry. Her work became a cornerstone for Solid Rock, fostering youth engagement and promoting both spiritual and social growth. Despite Mika's dedication to maintaining both her marriage and her work alongside John Paul, tension within their relationship began to escalate. Over time, it became evident that their union, initially rooted in mutual understanding, was facing significant challenges. The core issues included increasing control from John Paul and his interference in both Mika's personal and professional life. One of the first signs of trouble was frequent disagreements over finances. John Paul assumed complete control of the family's bank accounts, restricting Mika's access to funds. While he justified this as a means of safeguarding their finances, it became a source of stress for Mika. She felt stripped of independence, especially given her active role in church and mission projects. Additionally, Mika began to notice her connections with friends and family becoming increasingly limited. John Paul criticized her for spending too much time with her family and accused her of being overly involved in matters he believed detracted from their marriage. He also began monitoring her phone calls and messages, leaving Mika with a constant sense of being under surveillance. These controlling behaviors added to the strain in their relationship, creating an environment where Mika felt increasingly isolated and constrained. Psychological manipulation within Mika and John Paul's marriage escalated to include threats. Mika confided in her sister, Sierra, and close friends that John Paul used her past mistakes and vulnerabilities as leverage. One of the most distressing instances involved personal photographs that he allegedly threatened to expose if she attempted to leave the marriage. These tactics deepened her fear and uncertainty about ending their relationship. Amid these challenges, Mika began taking steps to break free from John Paul's control. She reached out to Sierra for support and shared her intention to file for divorce. Together, they visited an attorney who started preparing the necessary documents. However, when John Paul became aware of her plans, the situation worsened. He confronted her, refusing to discuss divorce terms and insisted that their marriage must remain intact to protect the church's reputation. Unable to find common ground, Mika temporarily moved in with her family to escape the pressure. This time away gave her a brief reprieve, allowing her to reflect on the severity of her situation. However, John Paul convinced her to return, promising to change his behavior. Despite his assurances, the problems persisted. One of the most alarming incidents occurred with Mika's car. She contacted the police after discovering that all 4 of her tires had been slashed and a GPS tracker had been placed underneath the vehicle. Mika strongly suspected John Paul's involvement. Although there was no concrete evidence linking him to the act, his sudden appearance at the repair shop heightened her suspicions. The pressure from John Paul intensified. He pushed for Mika to be hospitalized, claiming her behavior had become erratic. Based on his assertions, doctors diagnosed her with a psychological disorder and recommended treatment. Mika, however, maintained that her recent actions were driven by a desire to reclaim her independence, not by instability. After her discharge, she filed a police report, alleging that John Paul had used her hospitalization as a means to undermine her autonomy. Mika's efforts to end the marriage faced significant obstacles. Despite support from her family and legal counsel, the divorce process was drawn out. John Paul continued to exert control over her life, leaving her in an increasingly vulnerable position. April 27, 2024 marked a turning point in this story. On that day, Mika left her home without informing her family or friends of her plans. The events that followed, pieced together from surveillance footage, phone records, and discovered evidence, revealed a sequence of actions leading to her untimely death. Surveillance footage confirmed that Mika visited a gun store earlier that morning. Store employees later described her as calm and composed during the visit. While completing her purchase, she engaged in casual conversation with the clerk. She left the store carrying a small case containing a legally purchased handgun. The receipt and payment records confirmed that she had made the purchase herself. After leaving the gun store, Mika drove toward Lambert National Park. Surveillance cameras captured her car along the highway leading to the park. Data from her mobile phone revealed several search queries for secluded locations and park areas, indicating that she had carefully planned her destination. Upon arriving at the park, Mika parked her car and walked toward the river. After some time, she made a call to emergency services. During the call, she stated her intention to end her life and requested that her location be shared with her family. The recorded call, later released to law enforcement, captured the somber tone in her voice, though it lacked any signs of panic or distress. Less than an hour later, a passerby fishing nearby reported hearing the sound of a gunshot. Responding officers discovered Mika's body along the riverbank. Nearby, they found her belongings, including a backpack containing identification, a phone, a wallet, and a small Bible. The handgun used in the incident was recovered in the water close to the scene. The investigation concluded that the firearm showed no evidence of other fingerprints. Based on the collected evidence, authorities determined that the gunshot was self-inflicted. It was also confirmed that Mika had arrived at the location alone, and no other individuals were captured on surveillance footage trailing her. The official police report listed the cause of death as self-inflicted harm. However, this conclusion raised concerns among Mika's family, who argued that she had not exhibited any signs of depression and had maintained an active lifestyle. They pointed to her recent efforts to finalize her divorce as evidence of her determination to start anew. Despite the official findings, Mika's tragic death stirred widespread attention and gave rise to numerous theories about what might have led to the event. With so many unanswered questions, the story resonated deeply, leaving an emotional impact on both her loved ones and the public. The central argument raised by Mika's family was based on information she had shared with her sister, Sierra. Shortly before her tragic passing, Mika confided in Sierra about the pressure and manipulation she faced from her husband, John Paul. According to Sierra, Mika had even warned her that if anything happened to her, John Paul would be responsible. These claims were further supported by entries in Mika's journal, discovered in her apartment after her death. The journal contained detailed accounts of her troubled relationship with John Paul. She wrote about emotional and psychological mistreatment, constant control, and threats. Mika described how John Paul frequently used her past mistakes against her and threatened to expose personal information if she attempted to leave him. In addition, both her family and the community began to scrutinize revelations about John Paul's conduct, including potential inappropriate relationships with other women in the church and allegations of financial misconduct. Some members of the congregation claimed that the pastor may have misappropriated funds meant for missions, using them for personal purposes. These accusations fueled a wave of rumors and conspiracy theories. On social media and in the press, speculation about John Paul's potential motives became a topic of heated discussion. His history of questionable behavior, such as allegedly placing a GPS tracker on Mika's car and threatening to release private photos of her, intensified public criticism. Some online users accused him of indirectly contributing to the tragedy, while others put forth more extreme theories, suggesting a staged crime. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the accusations against John Paul drew the attention of both law enforcement and the public. He became a focal point of widespread condemnation, even as authorities found no grounds to open a formal case against him. Mika's family's persistence and the details that emerged from her life kept the story alive, creating an atmosphere of tension and mistrust. After Mika's tragic death, the police immediately launched an investigation to uncover the circumstances surrounding the incident. However, it quickly became clear that local law enforcement would struggle to handle the case alone. Due to the widespread public attention, pressure from Mika's family, and numerous allegations against John Paul, the FBI stepped in to assist. Their involvement was driven by the complexity of the case and the need for an impartial examination of all aspects. A key focus of the investigation was the firearm found near Mika's body. Investigators confirmed that the handgun was purchased by Mika herself on the day of her death, supported by surveillance footage and financial transaction records. No evidence suggested that anyone else was involved in the purchase. Similarly, footage from the Lambert Park parking lot showed no suspicious vehicles or individuals who might have been following or accompanying her. Despite confirming that Mika had acted alone, the investigation expanded due to public accusations against John Paul. The FBI began a thorough review of his past, including his financial activities and interactions with church members. Evidence surfaced suggesting possible financial improprieties. While no formal charges were filed, these findings heightened suspicions surrounding John Paul and prompted further inquiries. One of the most discussed aspects of the case was John Paul's potential role in contributing to Mika's deteriorating emotional state. Her family provided investigators with her journal, which detailed instances of manipulation, threats, and psychological pressure allegedly exerted by her husband. While these entries did not lead to criminal charges, they raised serious questions about whether John Paul's actions might have played a part in the tragic outcome. The investigation also explored allegations of John Paul's inappropriate relationships with other women in the church community and his overall reputation. Several witnesses came forward with claims of questionable behavior by the pastor that may have negatively impacted those around him. However, none of these accusations were substantiated with sufficient evidence to hold him accountable. As of now, John Paul remains formally uncharged, though his standing within the church community has been severely damaged. He has been removed from his pastoral role but reportedly continues to receive payments from the church's budget. This decision has sparked mixed reactions among the congregation. Some have called for a complete severance of ties with him, while others argue that the allegations remain unproven. This tragic story has also left a lasting mark on Solid Rock Church itself. The controversy surrounding Micah's case has eroded trust in the church's leadership, led to a significant decline in attendance, and cast doubt on the effectiveness of its internal structures. Many former active members have publicly expressed their disappointment and ceased participation in church activities. By the conclusion of the investigation, many questions remained unanswered. The primary focus centered on the extent of John Paul's influence on his wife's emotional state and his potential responsibility in the events leading to her death. While law enforcement has not found sufficient grounds to press charges, the public continues to follow the case closely, debating new theories and emerging details. This story remains a deeply painful chapter for everyone involved, serving as a poignant reminder of how devastating hidden conflicts and unresolved injustices can be. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.